Chapter 441. Dumbledore smiled kindly and in a relaxed tone said, "Harry is the discoverer of this item. Strictly speaking, he is the owner." John scoffed, glanced at Harry, and drawled, "Tea? Pumpkin juice?" "I think the last one was quite good," Dumbledore replied for Harry, winking. "Pure is nice, isn't it?" "Greedy," John muttered. The little golden figures in the room sprang into motion. They struggled open a liquor cabinet and hauled out a bottle of wine that seemed to glow from within. Harry had never seen anything like it. After he sat down, he watched several of the tiny golden men work together to present the bottle to John. John snapped his fingers, and a delicate, valuable goblet materialized before Harry. He opened the bottle, and though the wine passed through the air, it mysteriously collected in the goblet. Dumbledore picked it up, took a sip, and said softly, "It's truly delicious." "Let's get down to business," John said. He glanced at Dumbledore, who merely smiled and rested his hand on his chin. "You want to trade with me?" John asked lazily. "So, what's the price, Dumbledore?" The scene felt oddly mismatched. An old man and a schoolboy, yet the boy seemed to hold the clout. Dumbledore changed the subject with a gentle smile. "I think you could open a bottle of wine for the owner. It would show respect." John raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" There was no respect in his tone, but Dumbledore did not take offense. He behaved like a kindly grandfather, smiling softly. "Harry is the one who will be doing business with you." Harry was taken aback. When had he agreed to do business? He looked up at Dumbledore and found his eyes behind the half-moon spectacles utterly trusting. John sneered. "Well then, let Harry speak to me, but the chips have to be on the table first. Whether it's a trade or a gamble, we always have to see if the chips are qualified to be on the table." Dumbledore motioned for Harry to show the item. Harry drew the golden locket from his shirt. The snake-shaped mark was unmistakable. John's expression changed. "I underestimated fate," he murmured. "You found it." "Mundungus was going to steal it," Harry explained. "Mundungus? Ah!" John said in a tone that suggested he knew the sort of man Mundungus was. "Let's begin the trade." John's lazy posture straightened. An aggressive aura surged toward Harry. The easy mockery was gone. "State your terms," he said. "Money, reputation, status, items, potions, or would you prefer a return to youth?" He offered the last option with a sideways look at Dumbledore. As the second king, John had the kind of resources that allowed him to offer conditions most people could only dream of. Turning to Harry, he exuded the dominance of someone used to getting his own way. A boy his own age in front of him had no obvious counter. Dumbledore leaned forward and whispered, "Harry, follow your heart." The soft encouragement steadied Harry's breathing. He thought of Mrs. Weasley lying in a hospital bed, poisoned by a curse even the healers struggled to understand. He thought of Snape's failed attempts to find a cure. He thought of Ginny and the rest of the Weasleys. He made his choice. "I hope you'll heal, Mrs. Weasley," he said. Silence fell across the Constellation Society like clouds rolling across a dome. Harry watched John's face shift, mockery to surprise to something that looked like anger. Harry didn't understand at first. He stammered, "I." John laughed, but it was a strained, angry sound. "Is that so? You think I'd use Percy's mother as a bargaining chip?" His voice sharpened. The pressure in the room became suffocating. "Don't look at me with that narrow-minded gaze, Harry Potter." John's words cut through the starlight projected on the dome. Thunder rolled, and blue lightning flashed between the clouds. Even the little golden figures seemed to shrink away. "Harry didn't mean that. He was only worried and confused," Dumbledore soothed, a hint of amusement in his eyes. At Dumbledore's reassurance, the crushing pressure receded. John closed his eyes, then opened them again. The anger had gone. The dome cleared. The tiny golden men resumed their graceful forms. "I don't want to say it twice," John warned. "If you still wish to continue the trade." Harry felt as if he had been narrowly spared judgment. He had been foolish to assume John's grudge against the Order of the Phoenix would make him refuse any plea. John was Slytherin through and through, calculating but fiercely loyal to his own. Mrs. Weasley and Ginny were Percy's family. To John, that was enough. Once John understood that, Harry relaxed. He still had to decide what he wanted most, and what only John could provide. His palms were slick. He wiped them on his trousers, trying to steady himself. Then an idea struck. "I want a powerful wand," Harry said. John's blank expression flickered. A wand? He chuckled. I can agree to that. Leaning back with his legs crossed, John said calmly, Now it's time for you to place the price. Harry set the golden locket on the table. Please allow me to do a basic check before the transaction is finalized. John didn't reach for it at once. His voice from across the table was low and cold. Open. The locket, which had been closed, popped open as if on command. A black mist rolled from it, accompanied by a voice that seemed to insinuate its way into their minds. Then John said, Close. The locket snapped shut and slid across the table into John's hands. He picked it up without changing his expression. The trade is complete, he said. As for that wand, he added, snapping his fingers. Clouds swirled down in an inverted funnel. When they dispersed, a black wand rested on a velvet cushion. Crystal core, elder wood. This is a wand made for a warrior. John picked it up, tested it with a casual flick, then handed it to Harry. Use it well. Harry took the wand and immediately passed it to Dumbledore. Dumbledore examined it and felt its nature. This wand would amplify its wielder's magic. Thank you, Harry, he said as he accepted it. John waved a hand as if dismissing the matter. I think our trade is concluded. Both of you may go. Dumbledore rose with all the grace of age, and Harry followed. As they were about to leave, John called out to Harry. Chapter 442. Take this, Harry. An emerald green potion sat on the table. John rubbed the golden locket in his hand and added, Give my regards to Mrs. Weasley. Harry glanced at Dumbledore, swallowed, and took the vial. His heart hammered as he clutched it. After they left, Harry and Dumbledore returned to the adjoining room. You made an excellent choice, Harry. Dumbledore's face was kind. But Dumbledore, won't you blame me? Harry asked, feeling as if he had acted on impulse. If Dumbledore had chosen, he would surely have picked something more valuable. Dumbledore smiled and shook his head. I happen to need this. My old wand hasn't been properly maintained for some time. Besides, he added lightly, you let me glean a more useful answer from John. What answer? Harry couldn't help but ask. Dumbledore chuckled. His attitude toward many things, understanding John. At least we learned one thing. He has always been a John who values his friends. That is very different from Lord Voldemort. Leaning on the edge of the pensieve, Dumbledore grew pensive. Our lesson today isn't over yet. He took an open bottle from the memory shelf and poured a silver liquid into the pensieve. A scene formed. Among Silverhand's many enterprises, one fitted least with the image of a sprawling commercial empire, the enigmatic divination chamber. Few even knew it existed. Tucked in a black-fronted building between the Silverhand Johnny store and the alchemist's workshop, it was run by a single person known respectfully as the Elder. Even Tang Mi had wondered what role this person, who looked like a muggle diviner, could play for Silverhand. Trelawney was given drinks worth 100 galleons for free. People were even arranged to act as customers to pad the chamber's meager income. Over time, Tang Mi had handed the day-to-day to a witch named Jennifer. Jennifer had graduated from Hufflepuff and was patient to a fault. Today was the 7th actor's turn at the enigmatic divination chamber, and Jennifer herself had taken the stage. She pretended to be a confused woman and sat before Trelawney. Trelawney, thick spectacles gleaming, had donned an emerald green robe and hung tiny crystal balls as accessories, making her look every bit the stereotypical seer. Respected Elder, I seek guidance, Jennifer said, playing the part. In her head, she was thinking about whether to buy some freshly roasted quail on the way home. No answer came. Carefully, Jennifer looked up. Instead of the usual vague, unreliable divination, Trelawney's eyes had rolled entirely white. She stared into a trance between illusion and waking. Her voice was hoarse, as if she had not drunk water in 3 days, and a strong smell of alcohol rose from her, alarming Jennifer. Then Trelawney began to babble. The turning point has come. Hiss. The Dark Lord searches for servants in the shadows. A colossal thing destroys all. The fated enemy will slay the giant, and amid the flames a newborn cry will herald the dawn. The Dark Lord falls by the hand of a fearsome foe, and those who touch the forbidden shall meet no good end. The gears of fate will be unsettled. She ran out of breath. Jennifer, no longer playing, slid across the table to steady her. As she reached, a pair of claw-like hands seized Jennifer's shoulders, and a reedy old voice roared, You who trample life, you shall be cast into the abyss! Abyss! Cuff! Trelawney choked, her throat dry. She looked at the terrified witch before her, puzzled, and asked oddly, "Oh, why are you here, miss?" Jennifer, pale as if she had seen a ghost, wrenched free and fled. Trelawney looked bewildered and unaware that the crystal ball on her table had quietly begun to glow. Chapter 466, The Changing of Fate. Fate was quietly shifting, unbeknownst to most. After Harry left, John tapped rhythmically on the golden locket. Slytherin's locket, Ravenclaw's diadem. Coincidence? He murmured. He closed his eyes. It was too much of a coincidence. The two most elusive Horcruxes had been brought to him by two boys born at the end of July. The Savior, he thought. John had heard the story of the Savior many times. In the original course of events, Harry had destroyed the diary with a sword and was fated to confront the Dark Lord in the end. So perhaps this Horcrux would also have been meant for Harry to destroy. Fate is changing, and there are other prophecies, John reflected. He opened his eyes. The locket contained a fragment of Voldemort's soul. By obtaining it, John could confirm one thing. Horcruxes were a crude method, seeking immortality by tearing one's soul. The loss outweighed the gain. When Voldemort had discovered a new path, he abandoned the old, clumsy method without hesitation. He is powerful, John mused, but not a competent alchemist. He smiled faintly. Equivalent exchange, yet he tries to evade the cost. Putting the golden locket away, John activated Voldemort's doomsday timer. With the last Horcrux in hand, Voldemort's second chance was gone. If the Dark Lord's soul were to return, his power would rebound. John had no intention of handing over a powerful wand without it being profitable. Still, the incident at the Burrow had reminded him that facing those dark creatures required more power. A rudimentary plan began to form in his mind. The next day, John went to class. In care of magical creatures, Hagrid watched John tinker with his armor. John had given Hagrid the suit in the first place. The goblin-crafted plates were beautiful already, but after John's modifications, they looked fit for nobility. Golden patterns threaded through the silver plates. Hagrid was stunned. What surprised Hagrid even more was that his plan to train Grop as an assistant hadn't even begun before Grop had become John's assistant. John wedged a support near the neck of the armor and gave an order to Grop, who gripped an iron-bound wooden club. "Smash," John said. Grop swung the club down with a tremendous thud. Dust rose, but only a small dent marked the strike. John adjusted and instructed him again. Grop seemed to find joy in the repetitive work, a grin stretching his broad face. By the end of the class, less than a tenth of Hagrid's massive armor had been engraved with strange characters. "How odd," Hagrid muttered as he tried it on, rubbing a beard caught in his collar. "Feels lighter, but I'm not sure." He patted the belly plate, and it rang with a metallic clang. "That's a type of hard protective charm," John explained, pointing to the incomprehensible script. "Each engraving makes it harder." At first, John could do the engravings himself, but later he needed Grop's strength to finish the work. Even at only a tenth complete, the armor's hardness was astonishing. "Why strengthen it so much?" Hagrid asked, bewildered. "I mean, am I going to wear it out?" "There'll be a day for that," John said casually. "Don't forget your duty. Whether it's dangerous creatures or powerful wizards, having this will always help." Hagrid was reassured. He had no idea that one day he would don that armor and stand alone against an entire army. After reinforcing the human-shaped tank, John glanced at his schedule. Defense against the dark arts and potions. Today's classes promised to be eventful. As expected, after Defense Against the Dark Arts, the students were abuzz debating how to deal with Inferi. Sirius, having narrowly escaped death, had set aside his feud with Snape. He realized the Inferi that had surrounded the Burrow could one day appear at Hogwarts. All he could do was teach well so that the students might survive. And of course, Gryffindor's point-scoring ritual was not neglected. Thanks to Harry's experience dealing with Inferi, Gryffindor pocketed 25 points. Potions followed. Harry seemed distracted, half listening to Snape's barbed remarks. He kept flipping through the old advanced potion-making book, desperately hoping to find a hint whether the emerald potion John had given him could truly detoxify. Unfortunately, he found nothing. The vial had been sent to St. Mungo's that morning. If the potion failed, he'd feel unbearably guilty. Even Snape's familiar sarcasm barely registered. Snape docked 20 points from Gryffindor, nearly erasing the points gained in defense. Today's potions exercise involved preparing antidotes to a set of given poisons. Chapter 443. Harry wasn't in the mood for class. He grabbed a bezoar haphazardly from his cabinet and handed it in as the required antidote, only to be mocked by Snape as if he were a chimpanzee who couldn't understand human speech. 10 more house points vanished. After class, Hermione and Ron found Harry in a strange, distracted state. He poked his sausage absently 3 times, unable to lift the stubborn thing with his fork. "What's wrong, Harry?" Hermione asked. "I went to see John." Harry's voice was flat. The clatter of a dropped fork sounded. Hermione's eyes went wide. Ron chewed his sausage gloomily. "Mate, you didn't go and do something daft with him, did you? Do I look like some reckless oaf?" Harry snapped, annoyed. Then he added more softly, "I went with Dumbledore." He told them what had happened the day before. When Ron heard that Harry had offered to trade the locket for a chance to save Mrs. Weasley, he choked up. "Thanks, Harry." "You're welcome," Harry answered. He didn't accept the trade. Ron bristled. "He thinks my mum isn't worth saving?" "No," Harry hurried to reassure him. "John said he wouldn't use a friend's family as bargaining chips." Realizing he had overreacted, Ron shut up and chewed obediently. Harry then explained he had traded for a new wand, prompting Ron to grumble, "You should have made him pay more." "That's already a lot," Hermione shot back, giving Ron a sharp look. She sighed and added, "John's still as gentle as ever." "I sent John's potion by owl," Harry continued, worrying whether it would work. Ron muttered that they should have tested it with a Scourgify charm and got a kick from Hermione under the table for his loose mouth. Despite their fretting, the worry proved unnecessary. Bill wrote from St. Mungo's. Mrs. Weasley was fine, awake and full of energy. The healers blamed it on too much sleep. Having lost their house, the Weasleys were staying temporarily at the old Black family home. With its scolding portrait gone, 12 Grimmauld Place was quiet, almost like the room of requirement. Mrs. Weasley, full of beans, set about cleaning from attic to cellar, much to Creature's displeasure now that his chores had been taken away. The 3 little ones finally breathed easy when they heard the news. Ginny was ecstatic. Harry watched her bouncing around, a little mesmerized, until Hermione nudged him sharply and he stopped himself before he could do anything embarrassing. Harry held his copy of Advanced Potion Making and felt an ache of humiliation. John's skill was far beyond what the book contained. The knowledge in its pages had helped him in potions and even saved his godfather with a charm, but it was a cheat from an unknown source. He wanted to throw the book away out of shame, but he couldn't bring himself to part with it. In the end, practical usefulness won over pride. February arrived in a gray, damp hush. The snow around the castle melted into slush. Low, purple-gray clouds hung over Hogwarts, and a steady, cold rain made the lawn slippery, leaving muddy footprints through the entrance hall and corridors. Chapter 467, Apparition Genius. The first apparition lesson for the 6th years was scheduled for a Saturday morning to avoid conflicting with other classes. When John arrived at the Great Hall, the long tables had been moved aside and rain beat against the high windows. The bewitched ceiling turned slowly above them, matching the storm outside. The 4 house deans were there, each with their students gathered before them, and another small wizard stood among them, aside from Professor Flitwick, the shortest person present. He stepped forward, pale and thin, with translucent lashes and fine hair that made him look almost unreal, as if a stiff wind might blow him away. This fragile look, John guessed, came from too much apparition and magical research. The man introduced himself, Wilkie Twycross, sent by the ministry to teach apparition for the next 12 weeks. "Good morning," Twycross said. "I hope to prepare you for the apparition test. By the end of the course, many of you may be ready to sit the exam." John only half listened. Draco was crowing to Goyle and Crabbe about how Barty had taught him, and the Slytherin was keen to show off. Twycross explained that apparition was generally impossible within Hogwarts, and that the headmaster had temporarily lifted that restriction for 1 hour in the Great Hall so they could practice. He went over the 3 Ds of apparition: determination, direction, and deliberation, then set them to try. They were to apparate into wooden hoops set up around the hall. On 3, 4 loud cracks sounded as 4 students appeared in the hoops. Draco managed it but crashed headfirst into a suit of armor, swearing, "Your chest is like a rock, Neville." Neville touched himself uncertainly. Daphne cried out in delight, "I did it!" John, who had appeared in a hoop beside her, grabbed Daphne's left hand and murmured, "Not completely successful." She looked down. Her left index finger had been left behind. Before blood could even spring, John flicked his wand. The finger shot across and reattached, and a quick dittany charm made it look as if nothing had happened. Twycross stared, astonished. He had never seen anyone succeed on the first try, and here were 3 who had, plus Daphne's partial apparition, which he called textbook handling. The 4 became the center of attention. Students were used to John's excellence, but Draco and Neville were suddenly flashing with confidence too. Harry spun to look and nearly lost his balance. Draco sneered at him. Twycross tried again. The same 4 students landed in the hoops. Daphne lost only a strand of hair that time. Draco and Neville were steady. Twycross, now convinced, declared them very likely to pass the apparition test. The rest of the class was tedious. Twycross kept repeating the 3 Ds and making them practice over and over. Besides a cluster from the Constellation Society and a few others, only Susan Bones managed to reach a hoop once, and she left a foot behind. Harry couldn't fathom Draco's skill. He rarely failed, and Daphne soon completed perfect apparitions after only a few tries. The gulf between the Constellation Society and ordinary students was laid bare. Draco reveled in mocking those who still couldn't apparate, enough to make even some Slytherins want to sock him. Blaise Zabini came over to ask for tips, but left when Draco's arrogance grated on him. Blaise, despite that, had been buzzing with other gossip. He'd heard Ginny had fallen out with Dean and thought he might have a chance. He planned a grand surprise for Ginny on Valentine's Day, maybe even to steal a Gryffindor rose. Most of Slytherin shrugged at his chances, but Pansy was hopeful. Love, she believed, could cross house lines. Draco poured cold water on Blaise's fantasies, but Pansy scolded him. Draco couldn't understand why Theodore Knott put up with Pansy. What kind of taste was that? John glanced at Draco and noticed Daphne glaring at him. Draco was excitedly spilling the details of a Valentine's gift he intended to give Astoria, and Daphne's expression turned wicked. She quietly bought the same gift and planned to give it to Astoria before Draco could. When Valentine's Day came, John expected to see Blaise's present unceremoniously tossed aside by Ginny. Instead, he heard a pained wail from Draco. "No!" Draco knelt, aghast, as Astoria held up the exact same gift he had intended to give her. Daphne's little scheme had worked. John looked at them, bemused. Daphne had accepted Draco as Astoria's boyfriend, but she would still punish him. "It's okay, Draco," she said with mock consolation. 444, Chapter 444. When Astoria said that, she looked like a fairy bathed in holy light through Malfoy's eyes. "Any gift you give me is unique and precious." "Shh, what nonsense," Malfoy sniffed, and whatever sourness had been on his face vanished. He shot Daphne a very smug glance. John could feel, with amused certainty, that Daphne wanted to throttle him. By the afternoon, John had seen the next spectacle. Blaise was rejected, no surprise, and Dean, in a foul mood, rushed up to pick a fight again. Both of them earned detention. Ginny didn't seem bothered about her boyfriend's antics. John kept modifying Hagrid's armor. He painted over a third of the carved designs so that Grop could no longer hammer at them. After days of striking, Grop's knuckles had thickened to the size of fists. John sprinted to chase the fur balls Grop knocked away, catching them before they hit the ground. After testing the armor's hardness, John reckoned it could take a dozen giant swings without splitting. The house point race between Slytherin and Gryffindor finally steadied. Slytherin had clawed back into first place, but Hagrid's performances contributed heavily to Gryffindor's points. John had been expanding his practice with Hagrid, and Hagrid, eager as ever to show off, made it easy to rack up points. Occasionally, the runes and alchemy professors chipped in as well. John earned 30 points for translating 2 advanced runes books and an almost comically generous 50 points from the alchemy professor. Percy messaged John to thank him. The emerald potion had healed Mrs. Weasley. Fleur wrote wanting to meet. They arranged to meet at the Hog's Head during the next Hogsmeade trip. John finished his preparations for Hogwarts and turned his attention back to the Black Lake. He hadn't forgotten the 1,000-year-old giant squid that lived in its depths. While the weather was still cold, he had braved the icy water again. Even with March's arrival, the season remained damp and windy. On the lake shore, Malfoy and Neville were at it again, squabbling over something petty. The Hogsmeade trip was due, and John found himself making plans for his date with Fleur. 468, a miserable birthday. Katie Bell had returned to the Gryffindor Quidditch team after her recovery, which meant Ron would be replaced. He was crestfallen when he heard. "But it's my birthday," he moaned. His long-awaited birthday had brought only bad news. Harry tried to cheer him up. "It's okay, Ron. We can still go to Hogsmeade for your birthday." "Can't," Seamus said, shaking his head. "Hogsmeade's been cancelled." "No way. Oh my God," Ron wailed. His position was gone, and now even Hogsmeade was off. It was shaping up to be a terrible birthday. The day's apparition lesson didn't help, bizarre and boring, with almost no one succeeding, and a few unlucky students splinching themselves with terrified cries. The whole thing left the class listless and resentful. When March began, Harry went to wish Ron a happy birthday. Ron groaned in response, half asleep. A small pile of packages had been stacked on his bed, gifts brought by house elves during the night. Ron unwrapped them in a glum daze, then brightened when he tore open a large box and found a golden watch from his parents. "This year is a great harvest," he exclaimed, delighted. The watch wasn't solid gold, but it was clearly worth a lot. Ron's spirits lifted. He tore through the rest of his presents and ended up with a box of chocolate cauldrons on the floor. Thinking he had dropped it, he picked it up and popped a piece into his mouth. Harry, distracted, told him about the task Dumbledore had given him. "Since Snape returned, I haven't had much chance to see Slughorn," he grumbled. "You could go to the Slug Club," Ron muttered, still chewing his second chocolate cauldron. Harry shrugged. He wasn't keen. He'd skipped the 2 Slug Club gatherings since Christmas, worried Slughorn might put him on the spot, or that Malfoy and the others would turn him into a laughingstock. Seeing Blaise fawn over Ginny at the train party had made him itch to hex the boy. He picked up the Marauders map. Slughorn spent a lot of time in his office, but even so, Harry had no good excuse to call on him. It was almost time for apparition class, so Harry got dressed and turned to Ron. "Ready?" Ron wasn't in the doorway. He leaned against the bedpost, staring out at the rain-streaked window with a strange, lost expression, part bewilderment, part melancholy. If you looked closely, there was a sweetness in it, like a lovesick boy's. "I'm not hungry," he said when Harry reminded him it was time for breakfast. Harry frowned. "You're full?" "Oh, all right, I'll come down with you," Ron sighed, as if Harry had interrupted something precious. "But I don't want to eat." Harry's skin prickled at Ron's soft, love-struck tone. He glanced at the half-empty box of chocolate cauldrons on the bed. "You ate half a box of these, didn't you?" "That's not it," Ron replied, with a long, dramatic sigh. You don't understand." Before Harry could ask what he was supposed to be failing to understand, Ron burst out, "I can't take it anymore." "Take what?" Harry asked, baffled. "I can't stop thinking about her," Ron croaked. "Her?" Harry's eyes widened. "Who is she?" "When did you—" "You don't know," Ron said miserably. He stared off like a lovesick fool, and then, in a voice so soft it made Harry wince, pronounced, "Romilda Vane." For a long, stunned beat, the 2 boys stared at each other. Harry felt as if someone had forced a mouthful of dog food on him. "You're joking." "I think I love her." Ron's expression was rapturous, every syllable soaked in infatuation. Harry tried to play it off. "All right, say that again, seriously." When Ron launched into a breathless description. "Have you seen her hair? It's so black and shiny." Harry couldn't help himself. He snapped. "That's ridiculous. Stop messing around." Ron's response was a surprised whack to the shoulder. Harry's temper flared. He snapped his wand and cast Levicorpus. Ron was instantly dangled upside down in midair. "You called her a joke," Ron shouted from his inverted position. It took Harry a second to notice the half-eaten chocolate cauldrons on the bed. The pieces looked familiar. Then Harry remembered. Romilda Vane had slipped him one of those before Christmas. He'd tossed it aside when searching for the Marauders map. Hermione had warned him not to eat anything that looked like it might be drugged. Love potions were notorious for tampering with sweets. A chill ran down Harry's spine. Ron, still dangling and still shouting Romilda's name, sounded like a boy under a love potion spell. If Ginny ever saw him like that, Ron would die of embarrassment. "All right," Harry muttered, headache mounting. "Who can fix this?" He remembered the 4 cauldrons from their first potions lesson. Slughorn would know the antidote. Without wasting another second, Harry hauled Ron down and dragged him toward the headmaster's office. The cancellation of the Hogsmeade trip hadn't stopped John from leaving school without permission. Rules had never been much of an obstacle for him. He was sitting in the Hog's Head Inn when Aberforth, the innkeeper, registered his presence with visible puzzlement. If Aberforth remembered correctly, John shouldn't have been here at all today. Skipping class openly was one thing. Leaving Hogwarts and coming to the inn was quite another. Aberforth wondered, did the boy not fear being reported by a former Hogwarts headmaster's informant? John shot him a look. Why was the old man inventing conspiracies? Before Aberforth could do more than frown, a graceful figure in white silk approached. The woman wore a white cloak and a mask. Only when she reached the table did she remove it. Fleur looked about as composed as ever. "You didn't come on a whim, I hope?" John said with a helpless half-smile. "Of course not," Fleur said, blinking as she put away her mask. "It's interesting, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is." John shrugged. Tangmi had dressed similarly the other time. It looked familiar. He saw Aberforth move over with a glass in hand and raised a hand to stop him. "No need. Your glasses are too dirty." Aberforth's eyes widened. "You're sitting in my inn and not buying anything?" He huffed at the insult. Fleur's expression changed. She produced a small charm that muffled sound around them. The carefulness in her manner made John sit up straighter. "Sybil Trelawney made a prophecy," Fleur said softly, and then she unwrapped a tightly swaddled crystal ball. "She frightened Jennifer badly. Jennifer's not even sure she remembers it herself." John, who treated prophecy with all the gravity it deserved, nodded and took the crystal ball. Fleur's hands were steady, but her sigh afterward showed she had come for more than just a magical consultation. She dispelled the silencing charm. "I don't think the Weasley family suits me," she said before John could offer anything. He glanced around the dingy inn, realizing Fleur was about to unload. John snapped his fingers. Aberforth, who had been watching them with growing irritation, thought he'd been summoned. As he strode over, John conjured 2 delicate wine glasses and a bottle of very fine liquor out of thin air. Aberforth stopped dead. "You sit in my shop, don't buy anything, and bring your own liquor?" The innkeeper's indignation was obvious. John poured a glass of pale, cherry-tinted wine for Fleur and even conjured a cherry to float on the rim. Fleur sipped, and the floodgates opened. She told him everything about Bill, how it had been between them, the awkwardness with family, and how she'd been frightened by Trelawney's prophecy. John listened and served as the reasonable ear, refilling the glass when necessary and nodding at intervals. If he had to summarize Fleur's romantic problem in one sentence, it would be, he's a good man, but his mother is unbearable. The conversation took them through other tangled matters of the household and of Hogwarts. At one point, Fleur told the story of Ron Weasley and a disastrous love potion incident, an episode that had left a sharp memory in the school. Ron had been under the influence of a love potion. Harry had used Romilda Vane as bait to lure him to the headmaster's office, and Ron had followed like a lovesick fool, saying nothing suspicious. Slughorn had been in his bedrobe, humming and about to take a swig of mead, when a worried voice from the gargoyle announced Harry's arrival. He opened the office. Harry went up the spiral staircase, trying to be as quiet as possible, while a flushed Ron was pushed along behind him. "Professor," Harry said, barely above a whisper, "I'm sorry to bother you, but my friend Ron accidentally swallowed a love potion. Can you make an antidote?" "I thought you had already made one," Slughorn said, puzzled. "Aren't you well practiced in potions, Harry?" Harry hemmed and hawed. He hadn't made a love potion antidote before. By the time he managed one, Ron might be in worse shape. Slughorn, delighted at the prospect of helping and flattered by the visit, agreed to assist immediately. "It's his birthday today," Harry added, and the old man relented faster still. Slughorn fetched a small cauldron and produced a glimmering, emerald-green liquid. "There's a little of my universal potion left," he said with some pride. He poured a tiny cup for Ron, explaining it would keep him calm. "I only have a little left," he murmured to Harry. "I'm still working out its refinement." Ron, naive and trusting, drank it. The potion acted quickly, but instead of curing him, it caused violent convulsions. Ron slumped, foamed at the mouth, and writhed on the floor. Slughorn stared at his empty cup in shock. Harry grabbed the cauldron and, with trembling hands, poured the remaining 2 drops of emerald liquid into Ron's mouth. The convulsions eased, but Ron remained in a perilous state. Slughorn snapped awake to the severity of the situation and sent Harry to fetch Madame Pomfrey, while the others tried to stabilize him. A bottle of mead sat half full on the table, a seemingly innocent detail among the chaos. Listening, John's mind wandered for a moment. He hadn't expected to end up in the Hog's Head swapping love stories and potion tales with Fleur. When Fleur finally finished, John tucked the crystal ball safely into his bag and left the inn. He didn't head straight back to the castle. Instead, he walked down to the Black Lake. He confirmed his small bag was secure, then waded into the water. A Grindylow spotted him and darted forward, trying some mischief. John gave it a look that felt oddly familiar. After a second, the creature seemed to remember something and fled at twice the speed at which it had approached. The other denizens of the lake got the message too and scattered into the depths. John tried to reach out to the lake spirit, as he had before. This time, there was no answer. The water closed over his head, and he swam toward the spot where he'd last seen the giant squid. Aside from having split the lake and scaring creatures with the display of dragon might the last time, he realized he hadn't done anything else unusual here. Now, as he moved through the dark water toward the familiar place, he felt the house's hidden life around him, but received no reply from whatever intelligence lived there. Back on shore, the students who couldn't go to Hogsmeade had to make their own amusements within the castle. Unlike Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, Slytherin lacked high panoramic views, but it had something the others did not: a unique underwater scene. For many of the house's restless members, the Black Lake was the most special of all Hogwarts sights. The older students seemed to take a secret pleasure in tormenting the newcomers. Malfoy stood by a laughing first year, grin sharp as a knife. "If you see a merperson underwater, you can receive a blessing," he told the boy. The kid swallowed the lie whole. Malfoy, enjoying himself, leaned in conspiratorially. "There's an even rarer blessing," he said. "Have you ever heard of the legend of Underwater John?" "Underwater John?" the boy echoed, wide-eyed. He jabbed a finger at the great glass of the Black Lake. "Like that?" Malfoy cocked his head toward the glass, nodded, and began to speak when his eyes widened. John was there, walking underwater, a perfect, ridiculous echo of the tales. A classic scene, recreated. Unaware that he had become a Slytherin urban legend, John had swum from the far reaches of the lake to where the giant squid made its lair. The creature lay in a place that looked like an underwater altar, motionless as if it had been posed for centuries. John remembered how the last time he had used mind magic, it had been a mistake. This time, he held back. Even at his 6th level of magic, he felt the squid's unusual presence, an intelligence and strength that made him think of an underwater Dumbledore. "Black Lake Elf, if you understand my words, please answer me." He spoke in an ancient tongue, projecting his voice with one-way mind magic so he wouldn't be overwhelmed by whatever memories the squid might hold. The sleeping giant stirred, a tentacle twitched, the huge eyes focused on him. Something ancient and patient radiated from it. John's heart lifted. They could communicate. He lowered his posture, careful and respectful. "I'm a student at Hogwarts. I seek a drop of your ancient blood." The squid listened for a long moment. Perhaps John's phrasing was awkward. Perhaps the creature took its time. Then, when he mentioned blood, a tentacle extended. No demand, no bargaining, only what looked like pleasure. The squid seemed delighted to help. For the first time in a long while, John felt the contrast between human cunning and the straightforward, pure emotions of a magical creature. He smiled at the tentacle and felt a lesson land him squarely. Not everything had to be calculated. Drawing blood underwater posed a problem. John made a bubble of air with magic, and the squid, curious, threaded a tentacle through it. John took from his coat a small sealed bottle of deep blue liquid. When he pried it open and poured, the squid drank eagerly. It liked the taste. It liked the constellation wines, pure magic distilled, and these things enchanted magical beasts. The squid was so pleased it squirted a cloud of ink. The lake around them turned suddenly darker. John gathered some of the ink, and when the squid finished its display, it sent John upward. He rose, the meteor shoes on his feet catching him at the surface so he didn't fall. He pressed his palms to the glass of the world again, thanked the squid, and made for the shore. He emerged to a darkening sky. He used a quick charm to remove the water from his cloak and hair and started toward the castle, thinking as he walked. The giant squid's vitality was enormous. He had no doubt it could outlive him by centuries. Even more disconcerting, it was still growing. "It must be far bigger than it was 1,000 years ago," he muttered. The thought of a creature expanding beyond the lake, larger than the lake itself, bigger than the island on which Hogwarts stood, gave him a cold prickle. A tentacled force with that kind of growth and life made him think of the most dangerous names he knew. Back inside the castle, he found Filch sitting on the steps, chewing delicately on a pastry that looked nothing like Honeyduke's work. John circled the caretaker twice. Filch glanced up, annoyed. "What are you doing?" he grunted. "How fast do you think you can run?" John asked suddenly. Filch frowned. "I can reach Gryffindor Tower from here in under a minute." "Too slow," John said simply. "Speed equals power. You can be faster." Filch blinked. To be a better runner? The shoes were already near their limit. John watched the old man's confusion with amusement. Filch's real talent was his eyesight, eagle-sharp, even while wearing those broom-speed shoes. If he'd been born a witch or wizard, he might have been a superb seeker. Madame Norris wound herself around John's legs and purred as if to underline the point. John intended to take the squid's ink to the Constellation Society. The stuff from a 1,000-year-old being had uses he wanted to explore. He didn't get far before he was stopped by more pressing business. The hospital wing was quiet and smelling faintly of disinfectant. Ron lay on one of the beds, pale and still. Dumbledore stood at the head, his expression grave but composed. Harry paced at the foot of the bed, furious and terrified at once. He turned on John the instant he saw him. "So he drank your wine and ended up like this?" John asked, taking in the scene. Dumbledore held up a thin bottle for him to see. "I examined it," he said softly. "There was a deadly poison inside." Harry's voice snapped. "Why did you poison him?" John's reply was blunt and cold. "Do you really think I would do it that way?" He met Harry's glare without flinching. Someone tampered with the bottle. "You gave Slughorn that wine," Dumbledore said, looking at him. "Are you certain it was your bottle?" "It's mine," John admitted. "No other wine smells like that." Harry's accusation hovered like a struck match. John folded his arms. "If I wanted to kill someone, I wouldn't be that crude. Slughorn keeps an emerald potion in his office, the common antidote. I'm not the sort of person who poisons someone and leaves the cure in the same room." Dumbledore considered him. "Then someone entered Horace's office after you left." "Who has been in and out of Horace's office lately?" Dumbledore asked aloud. John answered evenly, "I haven't gone into his office since Christmas." "Professor Slughorn hosts many guests, his Slug Club meetings," Dumbledore said quietly. "That would be an opportunity." John's face didn't change, but a familiar chill crept through him. This method, this particular tampering, had a touch he recognized. It was a pattern he had seen before. The idea that someone had used Slughorn's hospitality to poison a student sat badly on his shoulders. Chapter 447. Just like the Weasley attack, everyone wanted to make a big issue out of it. If the other side succeeded, Slughorn would die, and the whole wizarding world would be in an uproar. At the same time, as the one who delivered the wine, John would become the primary suspect. Kill two birds with one stone. The mastermind was easy enough to guess. The hard part was figuring out who had slipped poison into the Slug Club after Christmas. Another insider, Tom. "Can't you be original?" John muttered. He decided he needed to talk to Slughorn about who'd been invited to his after-dinner gatherings recently. "I can rule out 4 people right away," he said. "Draco, Daphne, Astoria, and Neville. All 4 were members of the Constellation Society, and that made Harry protest. Then I can rule out Ginny and Hermione, too." "No, you can't," John replied calmly. "They aren't invulnerable to Imperio." Harry fell silent. Sometimes the truth was just that cruel. Everyone in the Constellation Society carried an amulet when they went out. Even if someone was in period, they could react quickly. Others didn't have that safeguard. Harry couldn't be so stubborn about it. John left the hospital wing thinking, was Slughorn the intended target, or simply unlucky? Had the wine been chosen deliberately? If it had been planned, the poisoning would have required careful calculation. If not, John was just unlucky. When news of Ron's poisoning and hospitalization reached the castle, pity spread among the students. The Weasleys were attacked at Christmas, and they still weren't spared at school. Ernie Macmillan, Hufflepuff's resident rumormonger, propagated talk of a Weasley curse. Ron became the latest in a line of family victims. Ginny immediately lashed out at the gossip mongers. The Weasleys were obviously fine. It was absurd to call them cursed. Blaise Zabini, watching, couldn't help a breathless aside. I really love this girl. John glanced at him. That pretty much confirmed Blaise as not the murderer. He wouldn't be doing something so callous while still starry-eyed. John checked his list of Slug Club attendees. Theodore? A name made him frown. He was invited too? Draco, who had just heard Ron was in the hospital wing and was deciding whether to go mock Harry, answered, yes, he was invited. John raised an eyebrow. Theodore Knott's invitation was surprising. His father, Old Knott, was in Azkaban. He was exactly the sort of child Slughorn wouldn't normally invite. More important, Theodore was Pansy's boyfriend. Pansy's terrible judgment in people was like a beacon. She always seemed to pick the wrong one. Check whether Theodore has had contact with anyone, John told Draco. Matters between pure-blood families were best handled by fellow pure-bloods. Draco groaned. I was going to have a date with Addo. No, you don't, John said, seeing Daphne suddenly perk up, eavesdropping, and he gave Draco a wink. Draco, too distracted by Potter to notice, protested defiantly. I really want to. Addo must feel the same way. Good advice wasted on the doomed. Under John's sympathetic regard, a large and ugly boil promptly appeared on Draco's face, ruining his chances and his pride. You might want to ease up on Draco a bit, John suggested tactfully. Even he can't withstand too many curses. Daphne snorted. I won't let my sister be deceived by an unreliable man. It was hard to argue with that. Besides, that man was already near the top of Hogwarts' most disliked list. Filch's sporadic arrests hadn't dented Draco's arrogance. He was loud and entitled, a fine person, if only he weren't so insufferable. On the second-floor corridor, Ravenclaw girls shrieked as Myrtle floated past. Can I see your necklace? She demanded, peering with interest. One girl, terrified, clutched her chest and fled. Myrtle considered the styles and shrugged. I don't like that one, she said, then drifted off to harass other older girls, who became her favorite targets. Once she had scared 3 girls into the hospital wing just to get sedatives. John found Myrtle examining necklaces and took a small magazine from his satchel that contained various styles. Oh, I need this, but I can't touch it, she complained, watching her fingers pass through the glossy pages. John set the magazine down and tapped it. It automatically turned pages. Myrtle floated there, fascinated. Can you do me a favor? John asked. I'll pay you. Of course, Myrtle said, drifting forward. Ask the other ghosts if anyone has stayed in the headmaster's office, and if it's not too much trouble, watch what these people usually do around the castle. John produced several photographs, credit to a certain Gryffindor photographer, and Myrtle agreed to help. In return, she wanted a pair of earrings she'd seen a girl wearing. John promised. Just as he was about to leave, he thought of one more question. Myrtle, don't you ever get bored being a ghost? Boring? Sometimes, West, she answered then, with a shy burst of honesty that made her gasp, added, but I like sneaking into the bathroom to watch boys shower. That's interesting. And she squealed, then dove into the broken toilet out of embarrassment. John spread his hands helplessly. He wouldn't get a serious answer from Myrtle. She had been dead only 50 years, young for a ghost. Most of the other ghosts at Hogwarts were centuries or even millennia old. Ghosts had virtually endless lifespans, since they were already dead. Now that he had giant squid blood, John had begun to contemplate immortality, the thing Lord Voldemort coveted but John had obtained easily. His current lifespan of 200 or 300 years didn't worry him. With the squid's blood, it would increase further. Even without the Philosopher's Stone, he could likely live into his professor's age. With the stone, he could perhaps live until the end of the country. But the idea of living like that made him uneasy. Would he end up like Professor Binns, teaching history of magic over and over for thousands of years, a walking corpse of a teacher? The thought chilled him. Vitality mattered. John took out the vial of blue blood and shook it. If his guess was right, this would prolong his life even more. But then he thought of the system's level 7 cap and felt a small chill. Could the system stop him here? He rubbed the silver ring on his finger and felt an anxious curl of doubt about the future. He had other ideas, seeking the Elder Wand to increase his power, for instance. But relying on external power-ups would leave him in a position where others had to defeat him, like Grindelwald and Dumbledore. If gods existed, then level 7 wouldn't necessarily be the limit, whether that meant a god of death or some other god from another world. He took a deep breath and rubbed his temples. These were worries for later. The immediate tasks were clearer: find the traitor who poisoned the wine and then kill Lord Voldemort. John still had the crystal ball with the prophecy in his satchel. He hadn't examined it yet. He'd spent yesterday listening to Fleur's love troubles, then diving underwater with the giant squid, and after getting back to the castle, he'd had to go straight to the hospital wing. Now, with time, he went to the Constellation Society and sat down in a chair. He set the prophecy orb on his lap, murmuring, "Sybil Trelawney, don't disappoint me." The crystal ball glowed faintly. The mist within dispersed, and a familiar voice whispered into John's ears. Chapter 448, A Turning Point Has Come. Hiss. The giant will destroy everything in Destiny, the cry of a newborn. The Dark Lord will die at the hands of a powerful enemy, and those who touch the forbidden will not meet a good end. The wheel of fate will be disrupted. Eerie voices echoed in John's ears as he listened to the full prophecy. He sat silent for a long time, fingers tracing the smooth surface of the crystal ball. The wheel of fate will be disrupted. The Dark Lord will die at the hands of a powerful enemy. Was the prophecy pointing to Voldemort or Grindelwald? Was the powerful enemy the chosen one, someone else, or perhaps a battle between Grindelwald and Dumbledore? And the warning, those who touch the forbidden will not end well, felt pointed, a caution to John himself. John snapped his fingers, tossed the crystal ball into one of the 9 locked cupboards, and closed the door. Whoever the prophecy referred to, the clear prediction that the Dark Lord would die was enough for him to regard Trelawney's work as valuable, though her daily vodka intake probably outstripped any raise she might get. He shut the cupboard, ensuring the crystal ball could not reappear. Prophecies were terrifying things. A week of exams and matches followed. Slytherin's next Quidditch match was against Ravenclaw, whose captain was Cho Chang, Cedric's girlfriend. Malfoy, as captain, doubled the team's training, making life miserable for the players. John sometimes wondered whether, if things continued like this, Astoria might finally break up with him. Classes grew more intense. Sirius was teaching defense against the dark arts and set the class to study giants, how to fight them and how to escape them most effectively. Professor McGonagall assigned a stack of transfiguration exercises, and potions piled on so many assignments students were drowning. The tension at school was only briefly broken by the second Saturday in March. Hufflepuff faced Gryffindor in a match many expected the Scarlet team to win easily. The result, however, was shocking. Cormac McLaggen, Gryffindor's usually unreliable keeper, stole a beater's bat mid-game, intent on demonstrating how to hit a bludger. When Captain Harry went to stop him, he was struck by the bat and knocked out. Gryffindor's seeker was out. Despite Ginny and Katie Bell's efforts, they couldn't recover. The final score read 320-60. Malfoy spent the whole day gloating. "If Potter can't even lead his own team, what's he even good for?" he taunted. With 2 consecutive losses, Gryffindor's chances of winning anything that season evaporated. Malfoy's mood only brightened. He even visited the hospital wing to mock Harry. If Harry's skull hadn't been fractured, he likely would have stormed out and fought him. In the Great Hall, John ran into Cho Chang. The 7th-year Ravenclaw, who would graduate next year, had one last wish before she left, to humiliate that stinky ferret Malfoy. She leaned over and hissed a threat toward Slytherin. "Tell Malfoy to clean himself up and get ready to be beaten by Ravenclaw." Cho still bore a grudge from the previous year, when Malfoy almost knocked her off her broom. John promised he'd pass the message along, though how much it would ruffle Malfoy was another matter. Daphne, sitting nearby, pointed out a few Ravenclaw boys loitering around Cho. I saw a few Ravenclaw boys fawning over her. Don't worry, she won't like those ones, John said with a soft chuckle. Remember, she's head girl. Cedric was confident in Cho. The two had corresponded steadily by owl, and the owls in the rookery had grown thin from constant deliveries. Monday arrived. Harry was discharged from the hospital wing. Ron was not. Madame Pomfrey said Ron wasn't getting worse, but the poison would take time to clear, and his recovery would be long and slow. Harry had searched in advanced potion-making for antidotes, bezoars, and other remedies, but nothing would undo Ron's particular condition quickly. The Weasleys had come up to visit. Mrs. Weasley's eyes were red. Their family had endured too much this year. When Ron briefly awoke, he was still weak, but on hearing that Harry had been taken to the hospital wing after McLagan's actions, causing Gryffindor to lose, he croaked, "I'm going to kill McLagan." Clearly, he couldn't do it in his current state. Life at school went on. Hermione and Harry visited Ron often. Ginny and Dean seemed to be drifting apart. They'd been seen arguing in the common room. That evening, Harry, as usual, went to see Dumbledore. The headmaster was waiting in his office. Harry couldn't help asking, "Professor, why me?" Dumbledore took down a small bottle from a shelf full of them, memories bottled and stored, and paused before him with a kindly look. "Why you, Harry?" Dumbledore asked. Harry, feeling suddenly insecure, shrugged. "I'm not as exceptional as you think. John is clearly more competent. Wouldn't it make more sense to have him face Voldemort? Neville's brave too, isn't he?" "No, Harry." Dumbledore shook his head gently. "You have something they don't." "Love?" Harry said, half irritated. "How is that useful?" "Love is the most powerful force, Harry." Dumbledore poured the memory into the Pensieve. "There is no enemy love cannot help us face." The scene shifted. Dumbledore said quietly, "We can find the answer here. We can see the difference between you and him." Harry hesitated a moment, then leaned in. He found himself not in the little office, but in the familiar room where the mirror of Erised had once stood. He watched a younger version of himself leave. He remembered that moment vividly. And then Dumbledore himself appeared in the memory, smiling and stroking his beard. "My beard did look splendid then," Dumbledore murmured. Harry realized with a jolt that after he had left that day, John had gone into the mirror room. In the memory, Dumbledore praised John's disillusionment charm and asked what John saw in the mirror. "Food," John said plainly. "Lots of food, and I become powerful." Harry blinked at the simple answer. John had always been moving toward what he wanted. Dumbledore told him, "You are indeed most suited to Slytherin. There is no doubt. Promise me, John, do not touch those irreversible magics." Dumbledore's voice in the memory was patient. "I promise you, Professor." John's agreement was steady. Harry watched the two make that pact and understood then that Dumbledore had known about his own first-year search for the Philosopher's Stone all along. He wanted to ask why Dumbledore had let him continue, but the memory moved on. Dumbledore's voice took on a different tone. "At the time, I thought I controlled everything. I was too arrogant." "Including regarding John," Dumbledore added in the present, when the memory ended and they were back in the office. "He is different from you, Harry," Dumbledore said. "John is not a rule-following child. His view of the forbidden is utilitarian, how it can be used. That frightened me then, and it frightened me still." "I admit I had selfish motives, Harry," Dumbledore continued honestly. "I knew too little about John. You are different. I know you better than you think, and I felt you needed guidance." Harry's mouth was closed, but his expression said what words did not. He understood the unspoken comparison between John and Tom Riddle. Dumbledore had feared what John might become. "I did pay attention to him from then on," Dumbledore said, growing serious. "John isn't like Lord Voldemort. He behaves more like a Slytherin." "He has all the Slytherin traits," Harry replied, puzzled. "Even Parseltongue?" "He spoke Parseltongue when he opened the box in the Constellation Society," Dumbledore said. "He's as gifted as Salazar Slytherin. You can't simply call him an evil wizard, Harry." Dumbledore saw what Harry wanted to say and shook his head. "You shouldn't be hostile towards Slytherins. Hogwarts is one school." "All right," Harry said, though whether he fully meant it was unclear. Class ended, and life resumed its routines. Malfoy spent the weeks before the first Saturday of April sharpening his skills, focused on three things: attending classes, training, and mocking Harry. He taunted Harry openly, sneering that Gryffindor hadn't even qualified for the competition. "That's the worst result Gryffindor has ever had," he proclaimed. Gryffindors glared, but the glare did little good. The day of the Slytherin versus Ravenclaw match arrived. In the stands, you could feel Ravenclaw's determination to crush the snake. John warned Malfoy beforehand. "Remember, Cedric's temper isn't always the best. Take it easy, don't do anything to Cho Chang." "Cedric will kill Malfoy," someone muttered. When Malfoy entered the pitch with Astoria at his side, he was radiant. Ernie Macmillan, doing the commentary, had clearly taken to the job. He practically shouted as Slytherin arrived. "Oh my goodness, 2 firebolts, this is practically cheating." Malfoy flared at the remark. What was wrong with skill? The Ravenclaw stands hissed and booed. In a student match, 2 firebolts looked like equipment advantage. Pay to win. Astoria's face flushed. She held the firebolt nervously with both hands. Malfoy stood with his hands on his hips, flanked by Goyle and Crabbe, utterly shameless and shielding Astoria. John spotted Luna among the Ravenclaw supporters, her feathery eagle hat fluttering. She was booing and shaking her small fists with everyone else. When the Ravenclaw team saw the 2 firebolts, Cho Chang's expression darkened. Were Slytherin playing fair? Ravenclaw, proud of its tactics, had just figured out how to counter the trident formation, only for it to change into a dual king tactic now. During the pre-match handshake, Malfoy indulged in classic Slytherin trash talk. Cho fired back. "Prepare for defeat. Ravenclaw will not lose." Neither would yield. Malfoy pinched Cho's hand during the handshake, drawing a sharp cry from her. She wanted, in that instant, to throw her broom at his head. "Start!" Madame Hooch blew her whistle, and both sides shot up. The brooms blurred through the sky. Hooch released the balls. "So fast! Astoria is leading. She scores!" Ernie cried a few heartbeats into the match. Astoria had grabbed the quaffle at once and netted the first goal. Malfoy pumped his fist. Cho called out to her team, "Hold formation, don't let them break us." Cho carried the heaviest burden, the snitch. Malfoy circled, eyes scanning for any golden flicker. Ravenclaw, though, were not to be underestimated. Their tactics kept up the pressure. Even with the firebolts, Slytherin's other chasers were being pressed. A Ravenclaw beater sent a bludger at Astoria, forcing her to break. A Ravenclaw chaser leapt up to contest for the quaffle. Goyle, ignoring rules and sportsmanship, shoved the Ravenclaw beater away and clubbed the bludger into that chaser. Another Ravenclaw tried to close in, only to be shoved aside by Slytherin chaser Vasey. "Foul! That's a foul!" Ernie shouted. "The referee has awarded a penalty." They take the shot, and it goes in. The score is 70-40. Ravenclaw is clawing back. Ernie's voice trembled with excitement. Could Slytherin's 11-match streak be ending? John wondered if Ernie had a soft spot for Ravenclaw tonight. He seemed eager to see the undefeated snakes toppled. Ravenclaw heard him and burst into song. "It's me, the eagle, soaring proud and wise." Even Gryffindor joined in, cheering the enemy of their enemy. Songs for the Eagles rolled out from every stand. Ravenclaw's momentum grew. They scored again and tightened the margin to 20 points, 70-50. Cho's smile was triumphant as she glared at Malfoy. "See, Ravenclaw's passing in control." "I see nothing, only a desperate struggle," Malfoy snapped. His palms were sweating. The thought of losing the streak and becoming Slytherin's disgrace gnawed at him. He felt the pressure. Astoria played a clever decoy, baiting Ravenclaw into interception and flicking the quaffle to Vasey, who scored. A Ravenclaw chaser, Urquhart, fought back, stole possession, and scored for Ravenclaw in turn. The match stayed razor close, never more than 30 points apart. At one point, it was even tied. The snitch was maddeningly elusive. Malfoy caught a flash of gold, and it vanished. From the stands came a voice, small at first and then gaining strength. "We rise from the mire. We crave power." The Slytherin roars swelled. It wasn't as loud as the other houses' songs, but for Malfoy it was everything. Slytherin was behind him. The weight on his chest dissolved. He relaxed, and his teammates did too. Astoria took a pass from Urquhart, broke through Ravenclaw's defense, and scored. It was like opening a breach in a dam. Slytherin's morale surged. More goals followed. The trident tactic, Forward together, each a sharp blade, began to cleave Ravenclaw's defense. Scores widened, 30, then 50, pressing toward 60. Cho knew the match couldn't be allowed to run on. She desperately scoured the air for the snitch. Sweat rolled down her face as she sighted it below the Gryffindor stands and dove. "It's the snitch! The snitch has appeared!" Ernie screamed. "The difference is 60 points. Catching it will seal the victory." Cho stretched in a tense smile. Victory within reach. Then, in a blur, a hand shot out beside her. "Cho, it's Draco Malfoy." Ernie had hardly finished when Malfoy, riding his firebolt at terrifying speed, blasted past Cho and snatched the snitch. Momentum carried him off his broom. Instead of crashing, Malfoy spun, flipped, and slammed into the Gryffindor stand's banner, using it to slide down. He stepped onto the Gryffindor flag, landed with theatrical balance, and raised his right hand. The whole arena fell silent. The score was final, 310-100. The referee blows the whistle. The game is over. Slytherin wins. Ernie's voice rang out, and the crowd erupted. The match had been a roller coaster, and the arena hummed with adrenaline. Malfoy plucked the golden snitch from the air and turned to Cho Chang with a triumphant sneer. "See? I told you. You were only struggling in vain." His taunt cut through Cho. She broke down and fled. John watched Malfoy's swagger and wondered if he should teach him a lesson. In that match, Malfoy and Astoria had been the stars. The victory made Malfoy notoriously glorious, basking in attention from all four houses. Back in the Slytherin common room, he was hoisted up, cheered, and carried around beneath the ceiling. Astoria's role was not overlooked either. There was a feast to celebrate Marblefoy's first victory as captain. John's appearance in the first game didn't count. The students laughed. Someone shouted at Malfoy to kiss Astoria. The boy who dared to boo was promptly hauled into the corridor, left hanging there as punishment. No one else tried to shout after that. Laughter and good cheer filled the room until Basil came in with a newspaper. He flipped it open casually. One glance made his pupils shrink to pinpricks. Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Amelia Bones, attacked and killed. Dark mark appears above residence. Silence fell like a cold hand. Amelia Bones dead. That was the highest-ranking murder the wizarding world had seen in a long time. Panic rippled outward. The attack on the Weasleys had been only the start. If Amelia Bones had been killed, the situation had escalated beyond anything anyone had expected. Pureblood circles, who knew more about the five families than most, began to whisper, connect dots, and draw terrifying conclusions. Everyone suspected the same name, Johnny Silverhand. "I knew it," someone hissed. "Anyone who crosses him ends up like that. He murdered 5 families. Now he's targeting ministry officials. Maybe Weasley was his doing too." The rumor mill burrowed into every corner of wizarding society. Johnny's dark mark, used to claim victories and terrorize, was the link they all pointed to. Fear spread like poison. At the ministry, Barty Crouch Sr. paced his private chambers, headache mounting as he listened to the speculation. He could not believe that Amelia Bones, his rival, had been killed. The voices in the hall had painted a picture he didn't want to accept, and his face had gone grim. "Was it you, John?" The thought haunted him like a pulse in his skull. He thought of the 5 families, of the Weasleys, and of now Bones. The thread connecting them was the dark mark. Everyone seemed convinced Johnny Silverhand had done this. Barty found himself unable to settle on whether to believe John or suspect him. The question ate at him until he summoned Piers Polkiss. Piers had recently been promoted to a senior post at the ministry. Normally slippery and adept at placating both sides, he sat across from Crouch, looking grim. Wall. Even he seemed unsettled by the gravity of the accusation. "The pureblood families are reopening investigations into the 5 families," Piers said carefully. "The Bones family is very respected among purebloods. Amelia did more than most during Voldemort's era." Barty slammed his fist on the table. "So what are you saying?" Piers didn't rush. "With all due respect, Minister Crouch, how likely do you think it is that Johnny Silverhand is involved? Who has the means and the motive?" The question cracked open a place Barty had tried to deny. He sank into a chair and let out a long breath. "He's narrow-minded," Piers went on. "You told him not to touch the pure bloods, but he doesn't seem to care about anyone's warnings when he chooses a target. Johnny Silverhand has money, private security, and men who will do anything for him, Piers said. His influence is a threat. If he doesn't get what he wants, could he replace the minister? Barty swallowed hard. He's done that before, Piers. Layers of grim possibility peeled away. Barty's resistance crumpled. I know what to do. Thank you. Seeing Barty convinced, Piers allowed himself a faint, professional smile. We're on the same side, Minister Crouch. Barty stood and walked Piers to the door. Once outside, watching the other man's back, something odd caught his eye. Piers's left index finger was bare where a ring should have been. An oddity that shouldn't have mattered lodged in Barty's throat. Piers, where's your ring? Piers stopped. The smile vanished. He turned, expression flat. Do you have to ask, Minister Crouch? Before Barty could close the door, Piers moved. The air seemed to chill. Barty's instinct was to shove the door shut, but he was too slow. A small emerald green snake, real and glinting, slid from Piers's sleeve and bit into Barty's ankle. Black veins spidered up his neck, his limbs refusing their commands. He was rooted in place. My master told me you have quite a few of Silverhand's goods, Piers said, voice low and smooth as oil. Barty's face went white. Pars, where is he? He managed. Piers leaned close, whispering, he should be sleeping somewhere now. The whisper sounded like a verdict. Piers raised a single finger and tapped the minister's chest. The world tilted. Barty slumped like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Sleep, my dear Minister Crouch, Piers murmured. Piers drew his wand and pointed it at the still figure, a cruel smile cutting across his face. Say hello to Silverhand for me. Barty's eyelids closed. A single command hung in the air. Imperio. At the Constellation Society, John folded the paper and read the same words over and over. Old Barty, he frowned. The article quoted the Minister of Magic personally promising to find the murderer and punish him severely. It was strange that Barty hadn't called John. In the past, when the Weasleys were attacked, Barty had stormed into John's presence, demanding answers. Now the minister had made a public vow but hadn't reached out. Was that unconditional trust or something else entirely? Their relationship had always been transactional. Barty needed John's money and influence. John used Barty's position for his own ends. Sometimes they called it friendship, sometimes only convenience. John felt the thought like a scrape in his mind. Amelia Bones's death gnawed at him. Bones was more than a ministry official. She was a formidable witch. To kill her required either overwhelming force or the hand of someone very dangerous. Could it have been Voldemort? He couldn't tell. There was no reliable information about Voldemort's whereabouts. The other side had been invisible from the start. The asymmetry of information made John uneasy, and the paper's headline only deepened the uncertainty. After his soul returned, Lord Voldemort became far more dangerous, sharper, as if suddenly enlightened. Amelia Bones's death threw the entire wizarding world into panic, and that invisible fear was exactly what Voldemort wanted, to strengthen himself while diverting attention he should have been the focus of. First Weasley, then Slughorn, now Bones. Every move was unexpected, creating and spreading terror. John set the newspaper down. Voldemort's aim was clear: frighten the community and drive the purebloods against the Silver Hand. Old Barty had moved quickly, stepping forward as Minister of Magic to shore up public confidence. He had once led the ministry against you-know-who. It was fitting that he would stand up again when everyone else began to tremble. John let out a private breath of relief, but the doubt nagged at him still. As he left the Constellation Society, he found Basil waiting at the door, a letter clamped in his mouth. John took it and opened it, his expression stiffened. The ministry had suspended the werewolf community expansion project? The envelope contained the formal notice plus a letter from Tang Mi. The ministry's wording was bland. Regrettable developments in the werewolf community meant, due to funding, the expansion would be temporarily halted. John read it over and over until he knew he hadn't misread. Old Barty had taken action against him. Had he bowed to pressure from purebloods, or was he breaking the alliance? He closed his eyes, drew a breath. When he opened them, the cold slit of his pupils gleamed. I didn't expect you to move against me, he murmured. That's surprising. He dismissed Basil back to the dormitory, then walked into the Constellation Society. A ghostly blue flame leapt up in the fireplace. John's voice was flat and controlled. Silverhand Manor. A blue flame flared in the manor fireplace, and he stepped out to find Tang Mi waiting, eyes full of worry. "Where's Jin?" he asked. Tang Mi had been the pillar holding things together since John returned. "He went to the ministry to negotiate," she said. John nodded. "Has old Barty been here?" "No, not since Amelia's death." The answer made John frown deeper. "Has he shown any recent movements?" he pressed. Tang Mi didn't know. The immediate problem was the suspended werewolf project that needed calming. John told her, "Go reassure the werewolf community." "And the ministry? I'll handle them." He walked out into the Silver Hand garden. "Who knows who old Barty met?" he asked. A man stepped forward from a flower bed, an unfamiliar Asian face. "You could have waited for me," the gardener said, coming up the path. "Call me Musashi," he added. Barty Crouch met with Piers Pocus at Crouch's home. John's brow tightened. A private meeting at Crouch's house rather than the ministry suggested Barty wanted discretion. If he intended to turn on John, he could have done it formally at the ministry. Piers might be slick, but he wasn't likely to push Barty to betray someone he owed so much to. Still, the possibility of a rift couldn't be dismissed. "I'll go see our old friend," John said. "Want company?" Musashi asked. John glanced at the gardener tending a row of roses, and then at the other Barty, the Crouch family servant standing aloof. The family connection would make entering Crouch Manor easy. The door opened as John walked in. The place smelled of old wood and damp. A wooden shield hung on the wall intact, the carved dog on the mantel unmolested, but a drawer in a table held old Barty's amulet. "He didn't bring his amulet," John said aloud, squinting down at it. He walked to the doorway and crouched, inspecting the threshold. 4 crescent-shaped nail marks scored the door's edge, pressed as if by strong fingers. On the floor were traces of crawling. Something cold flickered through John's mind, the image of a small, emerald-green snake always seen beside Bellatrix. If that snake had been here, it had been invited. Barty had met Piers. Piers might have been impersonated or controlled. Either way, Barty's situation was dire, and if Barty had been compromised and moved against John, there would be no easy way into the ministry to get him back. John exhaled. "Luckily, I left a door open," he said. "Want to go together?" he asked Crouch's servant. "It's none of my business," the man replied coldly. The rift between father and son was still raw. John shrugged and left. Inside the ministry, a fake Piers, posing as a high-ranking official, sat across from old Barty. He toyed with a 9-inch wand and spoke with amusement about Barty's stubborn will. Earlier, Barty had even briefly snapped free of Imperio. The imposter noted how hard he was to control. Still, under the charm, Barty worked like a wooden puppet, a quill in hand as he signed a document. The treaty before him would legalize the import of giants as protected magical creatures. The imposter's eyes wandered around the office. Someone had redecorated it in the Silver Hand style, dark tones, silver trinkets on the desk. He picked up one of those silver ornaments, admiring its filigree, then stared at the fireplace and frowned. As he leaned in, a blinding white light exploded from the hearth. In a heartbeat, his wand vanished, and something sharp pierced his neck. Vision swimming, he looked up at the figure moving toward him, attempted a smile, and then collapsed as all strength left him. John stepped forward and tapped his wand against old Barty's shoulder. The charm broke instantly. Barty jerked awake, horrified at the sight of the treaty he had been forced to sign. "John?" he managed. His first coherent question was a stunned, "How did you get in?" John nodded toward the fireplace, with a faint, almost teasing lift of his mouth. "Flu network," he said. "Don't tell me you forgot." Reminded by the man, Barty Crouch Sr. remembered that he had opened an emergency passage between Crouch Manor and the minister's office. With lingering fear, he burned the paper, his face grim as he looked at the imposter who was still breathing. "Who are you? Why are you controlling me?" The imposter clutched his throat and gave a wheezy laugh. "It's too late." He turned his crazed grin to John. "It's too late!" Something clicked in John's expression. Silverhand Johnny, his shop. John had been at the ministry and Tang Mi had gone to the werewolf community. The Silverhand Johnny shop was practically unattended, with only staff and a few security guards on site. A group arrived with a sealing order stamped with the minister's seal. The staff checked the seal and, stunned, obeyed. A female Auror dragged one of them out by the hair, snarling, Can't you see this place is sealed? The security guards, intimidated by the ministry, backed off. Once the premises were emptied, the woman's face shifted into something ruined and familiar, Bellatrix. An emerald green snake coiled around her neck like a macabre necklace. The other Aurors peeled their faces away to reveal crazed, familiar visages. They were Death Eaters. They began stripping the shop of goods. When most of the items were gone, Bellatrix flicked her wand at the conspicuous Silverhand sign. It shattered and flames licked out from within. "Second King," she called aloud with a sneer. "Do you like the gift I brought you?" It was provocation, a showy public counterattack from the newly resurfaced Dark Lord. By the time John arrived, the blaze had been put out. He listened as the staff read off a list of what had been taken, then looked at Barty Crouch Sr. with a hard set to his jaw. "Tom's clever," he said quietly. "You've really surprised me." Tom Voldemort's audacity, acting openly, plundering equipment, meant only one thing. He intended to attack Hogwarts. John felt no fury over the damaged sign. The looting proved Voldemort's intent and gave John the opening he needed to set his plan in motion. He glanced at Barty. "Barty, this might not be so bad." Barty Crouch Sr. blinked, thinking John had lost any sense of shock at seeing his shop gutted. "We've paused work on the werewolf community," Barty said. "I plan to give an old friend a big gift." John only chuckled. He worried he might not get another chance to leave, so he let Voldemort's brazen move give him the excuse he needed to disappear for a time. "Have the pure-blood families push this up through the ministry," he said. Behind him, the Silverhand Johnny's shop was already being repaired at a visible pace. He was heading back to Hogwarts. Chapter 476. Talent for acting at Hogwarts. If anyone drew Harry's attention more than others, it was John and Professor Slughorn. Slughorn because of his connections and influence, John because strong people always attracted notice. Lately, John was in a foul mood, and Harry noticed it immediately. John never wore his feelings on his sleeve, and he had even publicly reprimanded Draco earlier, something everyone found hard to believe. Hermione, who kept up with the papers, waved a copy of the Daily Prophet. "Look at this," she said, surprised. The headline mentioned Amelia Bones and said Aurors were investigating, and it also reported the attack on the Silverhand shop. Harry understood why John had been so agitated. His shop had been violated. Draco's face stayed dark after being scolded. Everyone had seen John leave before class. Daphne clamped her mouth shut at the sight of his grim features. Outside the classroom, John didn't let the stern facade drop until he was sure no one was watching. He was acting. The drama was a way to convince others and himself of his resolve to leave. If there were no conflict, how could he make his departure believable? He'd always been good at playing a part. Myrtle floated from the lavatory, buzzing with excitement. "I saw so much. That black-haired boy has a very good figure," she gossiped. He disappeared into a room on the 8th floor. Myrtle fluttered to John's shoulder. "I wanted to go in, but I couldn't." A room on the 8th floor. John thought of the room of requirement. He reached into his bag and withdrew a pair of earrings, keeping a promise he'd made. Myrtle whirled around happily. Peeves, drawn by the commotion, began to hover nearby, ready to tease. John caught him with a disarmingly gentle smile. "Peeves, come down. I need your help." Peeves, usually infuriatingly unruly, found himself oddly cowed. John promised some joke items if Peeves did the job properly. The offer flattered the poltergeist, who removed his hat and gave a mock bow. "At your command, Mr. Wick." Over the following days, John's effect made itself noticed. He was openly sullen. Once, when Peeves hurled a water balloon at his feet, John stopped the poltergeist midair. Peeves let out a shrill, forlorn shriek. Professor McGonagall's expression sharpened. "Put Peeves down, Mr. Wick," she demanded. John gave a short snort and walked away. McGonagall couldn't hide her frown. John had not used to be so brusque. He'd sneered at the runes professor's abilities and called the alchemy instructor second-rate. The snubs piled up. John's reputation took a beating. Slughorn invited him for a heart-to-heart, but the meeting ended in a loud argument. Everyone sensed something off. John seemed like a changed person. Only a few understood what had actually happened. Rumors multiplied. The Prophet had quoted a reporter asking Barty Crouch Sr. about Silverhand products. Barty had complained about monopolistic tendencies. People guessed, That was why John's temper was flaring. Draco kept his distance. Their friendship had cooled. With no clear clue about who had tried to poison John, whispers suggested any number of motives: power struggles, jealousy, or that John was simply angry his place had been taken. The gossip stung and fed on itself. When one particularly gossipy student pushed too far, John sent a curse that had the boy in tears. The harshness only made John seem less like the admired king he'd once been. Hermione tried to see him, but was refused. She was crushed. Harry kept thinking John was going too far. One afternoon, he sought him out, hoping John would at least apologize to Hermione. John sneered. "Apologize? I don't remember doing anything." Harry argued, "Hermione cares about you. Don't you know how long she's been upset about this?" "So what?" John said coldly. "Should I apologize to someone who pointed a wand at me?" Chapter 453. Harry's face turned ugly when he heard that. He drew his wand with a flash of anger. "I'm not joking. I'm not joking either," John said evenly. "Are you declaring war on me by pointing your wand at me?" John acted without another word. He drew his wand and sent a jet of red light at Harry. Harry's wand flew from his hand, but John didn't stop there. With a sharp flick, Harry was flung across the corridor, skidding into a suit of medieval armor. John trained his wand on him, and a force lifted Harry along the wall. "Don't come to me with that savior attitude, Harry," John said, his face hard. "What I hate most is your self-righteousness." Harry couldn't break free. He glared at John, stubborn despite the pain, and that stubbornness only seemed to irritate John further. He controlled the wards with cold precision. Harry's head kept hitting the ceiling. It felt as if his skull would split. John finally withdrew his wand, and Harry dropped onto the battered armor, gasping as pain seared his chest. From the corner of his eye, John saw Professor McGonagall hurrying toward them. Seizing the moment, he raised his wand and hissed, "Crucio!" "Expelliarmus!" John's wand flew from his hand. He turned to see Professor McGonagall standing there, her expression severe. Her lips were pale, and shock showed in her eyes. "What are you doing, Wick?" she demanded. To a nearby student, she added, "Take Harry Potter to the hospital wing." She stepped toward John, face conflicted. "I need you to come to the headmaster's office with me." John turned his head away and said nothing. McGonagall sent someone to fetch Snape, and the two walked in silence. Several times she opened her mouth to speak, and each time it became a sigh. After they passed a strange statue, she finally said, "I don't know what's come over you, Wick." She shook her head. "But I know you're not that kind of person." "Don't presume to know me," John snapped. "Are you going to try and make me a Gryffindor again?" McGonagall said nothing more and knocked on the headmaster's office door. When it opened, Slughorn and Snape were already inside. Snape's mouth curled with sarcasm at the sight of John. "Surprising, Wick. I thought you'd never make a mistake." McGonagall addressed them both, unflinching. "John Wick was about to use the Cruciatus curse on Harry Potter today. I stopped him." Both men were stunned. Slughorn stared. "Is that true, Minerva?" "John, it's true," John said bluntly. "His attitude is annoying, isn't it?" "With all due respect," Snape said, unexpectedly stepping in for John, "Potter does have a habit of lecturing people with that savior act." "That is no reason to use an unforgivable curse," Slughorn said gravely. "You must understand that using such a spell can put you in Azkaban for the rest of your life." "I don't see anything wrong with it," John replied. "Magic is magic. There shouldn't be crimes about how people use it." Slughorn's eyes widened in disbelief. "You would say that?" He fidgeted as if remembering an unpleasant thought. "You need to calm down, John. Perhaps taking a leave from Hogwarts would be best." "Professor Slughorn, Severus, you don't need to keep arguing for him." Slughorn cut in. "Whether the target was Harry Potter or anyone else, it's unacceptable. Hogwarts is a school. People who pose excessive danger shouldn't remain here." Snape opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at John, expression complicated. "John Wick, you should use this time to calm down." "Thank you, Professor Snape," John said, nodding. Snape's willingness to speak up despite the order's ties showed something had shifted. John left the headmaster's office. McGonagall watched him go, voice trembling with sadness. "Oh heavens, how did it come to this?" News of John's departure spread through the school like a firebolt. Everyone knew he'd been touchy lately, but few had expected him to be forced out. The notice Slughorn issued himself left many in disbelief. Hagrid even stormed into the headmaster's office, furious until he was turned away. "You can't do this. I am the headmaster," Slughorn replied. "I can. John's a good kid. I know him." "Is that so?" He nearly used an unforgivable curse on Potter. Thrown out, Hagrid blubbered back to his hut, inconsolable. Slytherin students protested, but it was useless. Nobody could fully defend someone who attempted an unforgivable curse. Even Dumbledore found John's behavior difficult to reconcile. When Harry heard John was being sent away, he clutched his bleeding nose and stared blankly, guilt gnawing at him. He feared his own actions had driven Slughorn to act. Later, in the Constellation Society, John said his goodbyes. Malfoy frowned. "I can't believe Slughorn actually did this. He expelled you, John." "Not expelled," John corrected with a shrug. "Just a temporary leave of absence." "We'll go plead for you," Neville offered. "No need. Thanks, Neville," John chuckled. "This is exactly what I wanted." He turned to Malfoy. "I'm sorry for my temper these past few days. If I hadn't behaved that way, I wouldn't have had an excuse to leave." "I always knew you weren't like that," Malfoy muttered. "If it had been Daphne, I'd believe it." Daphne clenched her fists. John hurried to smooth things over. "I'll be away for a while. I'm leaving the Constellation Society to you all while I'm gone. If anything happens, you can even let that old man next door help." "Dumbledore." Malfoy's eyes widened. "I don't trust him." "You could try," John said with a helpless smile. "Even if I don't want to say it, he's the most trustworthy person outside the Constellation Society." Neville hesitated. "What if Voldemort attacks you?" "Then it would only confirm other people's suspicions," John said calmly. "You have to give people a chance." "To make me look more isolated and helpless," Malfoy grumbled. John raised his hand. 2 items dropped from the protective dome: Ravenclaw's diadem and Slytherin's locket. "Keep these safe," he told them. He handed the diadem to Daphne and the locket to Malfoy. Looking at Neville, he smiled mysteriously. "Neville, the gift I gave you is in the armory. Use it at a crucial moment." "A secret weapon?" Malfoy scoffed. John smiled. "Astoria, I hope you'll come to the Constellation Society every day." Astoria agreed. Malfoy complained, "Then I won't have time with Addo." Daphne couldn't bear it, and with a flick made Malfoy float on a little cloud, a pointed reminder that showing affection in front of someone's sister has consequences. John straightened his cloak. "I still have to go to the Forbidden Forest. I'm leaving now." "You're coming back, right?" Daphne asked, worried. John's mouth curved. "Of course. I never break my promises." He opened the door and left. Outside, Hagrid rushed to him and hugged him so hard John could hear the man's sobs. "I can't believe they'd do this." Hagrid fumbled with a pink handkerchief to blow his nose and wipe his tears. Fang circled John's legs and barked indignantly as if he sensed he'd lost a companion. John patted Hagrid's shoulder. "Remember what I told you, Hagrid. Don't lock up the armor." They had left a carved, patterned suit of armor in the hut for safekeeping. John bid Hagrid goodbye and headed into the Forbidden Forest to find the unicorns. Wei Wei glided to meet him, displeased. "I heard your muddle-headed principal wants to expel you." "Temporary suspension, not expulsion," John corrected. He and Wei Wei went on to the unicorn gathering. After exchanging a few things with Clark there, he left the forest and walked out of the grounds with his luggage. 2 owls circled overhead as students whispered at the sight. He passed through the foyer with a solemn face. "Hi, John," Luna greeted him. Beside her, the crumple-horned Snorkack, now the size of a medium dog after transforming from a puppy, stood with its paws on its hips as if to keep its balance. "Luna," John said, rubbing his forehead as he felt countless eyes on him. "I'm leaving school." "You'll come back, right?" Luna blinked. "You seem to be in a very good mood." John almost failed to keep his solemnity at her innocent perception, but he managed a small smile. "Yes, I'll be back. But you have to keep it a secret. Tom is entrusted to your care." "Okay," Luna beamed. "Tom has been playing with Mr. Crumplehorn Snorkack a lot lately." Chapter 454. John smiled helplessly, waved at Luna, and boarded the Thestral carriage. Once he vanished from sight, everyone finally accepted that the so-called King of Slytherin had really gone. Luna stayed on the platform, still waving. Most people ignored her. What could you expect from a girl they thought mad? They arrived at Hogsmeade Station, outside Hogwarts boundaries. John patted the Thestral's head and stopped. He saw Dumbledore standing on the platform and called casually, "Here to see me off, Professor?" Dumbledore looked surprised. "I thought you wouldn't be the sort to attack another student." John's expression hardened. "Oh," he said coldly, "even if I have all the marks of a Slytherin?" Parseltongue curled under his breath. Dumbledore's face darkened. "You misunderstand. Slytherin has never been a stain." "Is that so?" John's tone was bitter. "I always thought you felt otherwise. Dumbledore, you've never shown Slytherin any genuine goodwill." Dumbledore forced a smile. "I admit I have shown favoritism in certain circumstances. It was fear that made me do it." "Fear of another Lord Voldemort?" John sniffed. "Your thoughts are too simple. You treat Snape the same way. You trust him, but won't truly confront him." "You used Snape's feelings," John added like a blade. "From beginning to end, you exploited them." The words struck at something Dumbledore had kept buried. He opened his mouth, trying to reply, but John cut him off. "I don't think we have anything left to talk about," he said, then spat. "Say hello to your savior for me, Dumbledore." With that, John apparated away. Dumbledore remained on the platform long after the carriage left, shaking his head. He wanted to say he trusted John, but John's tone had made reconciliation impossible. "He's under too much pressure," Dumbledore murmured. "Perhaps he needs to calm down." Barty Crouch Sr. buckled under pressure from the pureblood faction and repeatedly pushed to rein in the Silver Hand. The purebloods approved, and the Silver Hand Johnny shop was attacked, damaging Johnny Silverhand's reputation. Tang Mi was distraught until John appeared, and she breathed a small sigh of relief. To her surprise, John glanced at the damage report, waved it aside, and told her not to worry. "Put this aside for now," he said dismissively. Tang Mi bristled. "Small sum? Did he not realize what it meant to have money?" Of course, money changed everything. She could hardly conceal her irritation when John asked, "Has that batch of goods shown up on the black market?" "No, not a single item," Tang Mi replied, puzzled. "That shipment alone could arm an army." John stroked his chin. "So Voldemort has found a lot of recruits. Keep watching the black market. Tell the werewolf community to restrain their members. Old Jack's influence and your reputation should hold them for now. I have a hunch the werewolves will be targeted next." "We need more leverage for Voldemort," John said, his eyes narrowing as he looked over the loss reports. In the days that followed, the atmosphere changed. Diagon Alley thinned out. Nocturne Alley did too. People feared the return of a Dark Lord. The Second King they relied on couldn't even protect his own shop. Fear spread through the wizarding world. That very day, Ollivanders had been attacked. The old wandmaker had been seized. People in Diagon Alley prayed for a hero, but Lockhart was in America promoting Silver Hand products as an endorser. Where panic grows, people long for a savior, and the papers were full of stories about that very star. John sifted through the headlines and set aside a flyer bearing the dark mark. "Someone is deliberately spreading this," he observed. The propagandist had been found in Nocturne Alley, a young man shouting that Lord Voldemort would rule the magical world. John locked him in a room and let him rant. He wanted the man to keep saying what he said. "We aren't doing anything," Tang Mi asked. "With the Silver Hand's resources, they could dispel this fear. It wouldn't be impossible." "Feign weakness," John replied. He was building momentum for Voldemort, giving him tools, an image, and the impression of strength. In effect, John was lending Voldemort confidence, arranging equipment and incidents so others would believe Voldemort had power. "My support gives him the nerve to act openly. Otherwise, he wouldn't dare seize people and risk Auror pursuit." John put his feet on the table and idly stroked Riddle's head. Basil, seeing the attention, flew over, jealous. Riddle's head met Basil's gaze and shuffled aside to let the snake get closer. The two, one black, one white, closed their eyes contentedly. Tom, John thought, would have loved to join in if he'd been here. Tang Mi sighed and let it go when John continued. "There's been activity in America. The District 11 boss was killed and the second-in-command took over." "So it's not a coincidence," said John. He wasn't worried about the American branches. Some of their people had been conditioned by him. Now, with the old boss dead, the new leader might act without restraint. "Let Tom make a fuss," John said lightly. At the Silver Hand Johnny branch in America, Gilderoy Lockhart was fawning over a woman in a wheelchair. Johnson, standing guard, shoved him aside. Madame Nagini needs to rest, he said bluntly. Lockhart smiled, bowed, and insisted he wouldn't disturb her. Of course, I would never trouble the beautiful Madame Nagini. Johnson watched him go and muttered, "You really believe in strength, don't you?" Nagini laughed. "Read his books. He's a great wizard." "You're lying," Johnson snapped. "A weakling like that with a banshee? No thanks." After he'd ushered Nagini back inside, Johnson resumed his post in the hot sun. He saw the new District 11 head arrive, flanked by wizards in black robes. Tangmi's premonition proved true. The branch was attacked. The most valuable item, the magic-powered Starfall wand, was stolen. John only chuckled when he heard. So Tom's learned his shortcomings. His wings are growing. Tangmi was speechless. Who would nurture their rival and hand him the tools to be dangerous? The Starfall wand had been John's creation for the branch, a holly wand set with a philosopher's stone. He'd expected this contingency when Silverhand Johnny was looted. "No casualties is the best news," John said, closing the book. "Arrange compensation and treatment for the injured." "And the new head of District 11? "Kill him," John said casually. "Let others do it. Remove all the traitors in District 11. Tangmi nodded and left to carry out the orders. With people, weapons, and incidents now aligned, Voldemort lacked only the chance to strike at Hogwarts. John mulled over the steps ahead. First, he had to make sure the stolen item still existed. Second, he had to make certain everyone believed he had really left Hogwarts. He muttered a final thought about Pansy. She really is blind, and remembered Myrtle's report. She'd seen Theodore Knott slip into the room of requirement. Myrtle suspected he was contacting outsiders from inside. Chapter 455. Myrtle could pass through walls, but she couldn't turn invisible. So John arranged for a ghost who could remain unseen to follow him, the Bloody Baron. The Slytherin ghost agreed, certainly not because John had promised to deliver a flower to the Grey Lady on his behalf. Filch and Madame Pince kept an eye on him in the corridors and in the Hogwarts library as well. Lucius Malfoy had been digging into the recent troubles surrounding the Knott family. Theodore's father had been a Death Eater and had been sent to Azkaban. Theodore blamed John for it. Unlike Goyle and Crabbe, the Knotts hadn't been promised leniency by John. That omission drove Theodore into the arms of Bellatrix and eventually made him an informant. To smooth his path, he had even tried to show goodwill to Slughorn and become Pansy's boyfriend. Malfoy deserved a good beating, John thought, but Malfoy's question had been accurate enough. "Do you think this will save your father?" John shook his head. Theodore was either naive or simply ignorant of how the world worked. Voldemort's promises were conditional, only true if the mission succeeded. That condition, John knew, was impossible from the start. He felt sorry for Theodore. No matter how hard the boy tried, it wouldn't be enough. "You'd do better to try to persuade Old Knott," John muttered to himself. Old Knott's loyalty to Voldemort put him well outside John's pardon list. If Old Knott hadn't been the father of a Slytherin classmate, John could have arranged an accident for all the die-hard loyalists, blamed it on Azkaban, and been done with it. Instead, a sliver of pity John had shown was being used as a weapon by Voldemort. John was waiting for someone, actually two people, though one of them wasn't the person he had expected. The fellow who kept demanding more money had a good relationship with the other party. Inside Silverhand Manor, John finally met them both, Musashi and Gauci. They had one thing in common: money. Gauci would take any job for pay. Musashi only took what he thought he deserved. Gauci liked to pretend he was a peace-loving, benevolent sort of wizard. Musashi more convincingly was. "Young boss," Gauci whistled when he saw John unmasked, sizing him up like a rowdy. "Never thought you'd be so young. Being younger means I won't be stingy with a little coin," John said evenly. Gauci laughed. "All right, I admit it, but understand this. My friend here expects a higher wage. I only need him as a guide. I didn't say I wanted him killed," John replied, watching Gauci play the fool with thin patience. "And I don't haggle about that." "I believe you," Musashi said. "I'll take you there." "Then it's a deal." John shook Musashi's hand. Musashi offered a faint smile in return. "We should change our mode of travel," John added. "I hope none of you get seasick," John said lightly. Gauci brightened. "I love boats, and I shouldn't have to pay for the passage myself, right?" The ship sailing east. A cruise ship cut through the sea, its whistle carrying across the water. On deck, the mix of Eastern and Western faces, beautiful women, fine wine, and rich food made the place look like a floating party. Gausi reclined in a deck chair, cocktail in hand, all contentment. "Don't be shy. Make yourself at home, Musashi," he called. Gausi had settled in like he belonged there, wearing a beach t-shirt that would have looked odd at Hogwarts and sipping something freshly mixed by the ship's bartender. Musashi ignored him and instead watched John, who stood at the rail, letting the breeze play with his hair. "Are you sure it's all right to be so conspicuous?" Musashi asked. "This is supposed to be a trip," John said with a small smile. "Relax. Besides, you're going home." Mention of home tightened something in Musashi's face, equal parts anticipation and dread. "You don't look very old," John said, leaning on the railing as a seagull landed nearby. "By Hogwarts reckoning, you graduated less than 2.5 years ago. How did a recent graduate end up traveling with a rogue like Gausi?" Musashi had a history he wasn't eager to recount. Sensing an opportunity, Gausi rubbed his hands together. 10 galleons, and I'll tell you the whole story of the Eastern Wandering Wizard, he offered. "Deal." John drew 10 galleons from his pouch and tossed them to Gausi without hesitation. Money was one thing John rarely begrudged. Gausi promptly split the coins, handing 5 to Musashi. "Half to my friend, like we agreed," Gausi began. He wasn't principled. He worked for money and did nearly anything for it. But he had a sense of contract. He did the work he was paid for. The job that changed his life had belonged to a client with enormous appetites. Gausi had dealt with the client's rival, but the client betrayed him by turning Gausi's information over to the Aurors. Chased all the way out of the country, Gausi fled to Norway. There he met Musashi. Back then, Musashi had looked like a homeless street dog in a white robe. When Aurors closed in, Musashi had intentionally given them the wrong information while pretending not to see Gausi hiding behind a barrel. In return for the favor, Musashi had eaten every galleon in Gausi's pocket. "You don't know how much he can eat," Gausi said, still half afraid and half amused. But they discovered they shared a trait that cemented their partnership. They both loved money. Musashi had saved Gausi expecting repayment. When Gausi had none, he agreed to go into business with Musashi, splitting any future earnings evenly. Later, when John rehired Gausi, Musashi came along too. "You grew up at the Magic Institute, didn't you?" John asked casually. Musashi's expression darkened. "They're a closed sort of place. Western wizards don't know them well." "You studied there?" "Yes." He closed his eyes, the memory clearly painful. "But they wouldn't accept me. My uniform was white." John raised an eyebrow. "Their uniforms change color with the student's growth and performance, don't they? Light red at the start, and then different colors for different things." "A white uniform means you broke the wizard's code," Musashi said bitterly. The shame stung. He had fled in disgrace, and now he was forced to return. The thought felt like a sentence on his self-worth. Gausi, ever practical, waved it off. "Don't give up for the sake of pride. How long will it take you to earn those galleons?" he whispered, putting an arm around Musashi's shoulder as if that could fix anything. Musashi's face grew darker. He had hoped to talk about feelings, and Gausi replied with money. John, unruffled, watched the harbor approach and the line of the coastline grow clearer. Back at Hogwarts, the place looked the same on the surface, but John's absence had stirred small ripples. Slytherin remained as competitive as ever, and Malfoy was still insufferable. Pansy had twisted her hair into pigtails and overdressed as if for a princess, cooing to Theodore, "Where should we go on our date?" Theodore Knott paused with his quill. Pansy caught his hand and swung it, a display that made Malfoy make a face of exaggerated disgust. "I'm about to be sick," Malfoy muttered. Pansy's smile froze when she noticed the reaction. She shot Malfoy a cold look. He quickly recovered his composure and went off to bother Harry. Theodore excused himself, saying he needed a book from the library, and told Pansy to wait. "No, I want to come too," she pouted, used to playing sweet. "Wait here," Theodore ordered in a tone that brooked no argument. Pansy froze and watched him leave the great hall. He climbed the stairs, moving toward the 5th floor where the Hogwarts library lay. Stopping at the top of the steps, Theodore scanned the corridor to make sure no one was watching. He passed the caretaker's office and halted in front of a door marked with an eye. The eye fixed on him. He pulled a badge from his pocket and pinned it to his chest. At the sight of the badge, the painted eye turned away. Theodore put his hand to the door and pushed. It opened onto a space of golden script and a starry ceiling. The library was empty. He slipped inside. Chapter 456. He searched cautiously inside, but found nothing. Finally, he fixed his gaze on the 9 doors, walked to one and pushed it open. Beyond it lay a world of ice and snow. The cold hit him like a wall. Theodore hastily shut the door. The second door opened onto a forest thick with vines and leaves. A vine moved suddenly, coiling around his ankle and almost yanking him in. He wrenched free and stared at the third door. Inside it was darkness, and in the darkness a light glowed, a golden cup. He tried to step through, but a force repelled him and the door slammed shut. No! Theodore dashed to open it again, but the darkness had been replaced by the ocean. A rush of seawater gushed out, soaking him to the bone. Afraid to try the fourth door, he fled the Constellation Society. He tore the badge from his chest and ran to the room of requirement on the 8th floor. Inside was a strange envelope. Words written on it would appear on another letter. Theodore wrote a single sentence. "That thing is in a door." After writing, he hurried away. Too long an absence would draw suspicion. He stopped in the library on the 5th floor and casually picked up a book on alchemy. Back in the great hall, Pansy saw him and, noticing how drenched he was, asked with concern, "Why are you sweating so much?" Theodore wiped the water off. "It's nothing." Across the hall, Malfoy went on about Harry being knocked out in Quidditch by his own team. The ship docked in the harbor. John, like the other tourists, had a camera slung around his neck. Gauci wore a fisherman's hat and beach shorts and carried a briefcase, an odd sight in this city. After scanning his passport, John passed through calmly. Gauci, however, was subjected to repeated checks, arousing suspicion that he might be carrying some kind of weapon. After the inspection, Gauci ran up to John to complain. "It's over. My dignity's been trampled," he said, wounded. John looked at him coolly. "How much is your dignity worth?" 10 galleons might soothe the wound. 50 and I'll act like nothing happened," Gauci admitted. 100 galleons and you can throw your dignity away. John smirked. "Fine, take 100, he said, flashing his money and immediately disarming Gauci's complaints. Walking through the eastern city, John glanced at a man in a trench coat by a taxi. "Looks like we're being watched." Gauci looked over and began fawning. "Give me the money and I'll handle him." "That should be an Auror dealing with illegal entry," John said warily. "I don't take human lives lightly." Akiya Musashi's expression changed when he saw the newcomers. The Auror noticed Akiya and walked toward them. John calmly turned and walked another way. The Auror followed. The 3 of them moved down a different street, but, unfamiliar with the area, ended up in a dead end. The Auror blocked their exit and looked up, revealing the face beneath his hat. "Akiya Musashi, where are you going?" Gauci didn't understand. The man was not speaking English. Akiya Musashi turned back with a heavy expression and said in a low voice, "Big Bear." The Auror Big Bear sneered. "Akiya Musashi, you were unwelcome before. You shouldn't have returned." "I tried to stay away," Akiya said, glancing at the eager Gauci, "but I had to come back." "Then you won't be leaving." Big Bear drew his wand. "It looks like a fight." Gauci's eyes lit up. "Boss, you don't want to get tangled with an Auror, do you? Give me 500 galleons and I'll take care of him." John glanced at the excited Gauci. "There's more than one." With 2 loud pops, 2 more Aurors appeared in the alley, one thin, one fat. When they saw Akiya Musashi, their faces darkened, mirroring Big Bear's expression. Akiya's expression turned complex. "Guchuan, Goda." "You actually dared to show up," Guchuan the thin one roared. "We absolutely won't go easy on you." "Goda, Guchuan, go!" Big Bear ordered, and all 3 drew their wands. John looked at Akiya. "Trouble? They're after me," Akiya said, taking a deep breath. "I can handle it." "Hey, don't be so stubborn, kid," Gauci protested. 3 against 1. Unfair. "This is the karma I must face," Akiya replied. Big Bear attacked first. A red beam shot from his wand at Akiya, who raised a shield charm to deflect it and returned a silver flash. The 3 Aurors attacked in coordinated succession, pushing Akiya onto the defensive. "Akiya Musashi, while you were away, I never slacked off in my training," Big Bear roared. It was all so I could defeat you with my own hands. Goda, Guchuan, go. Superfusion, red light burst, Expelliarmus, Phoenix cry, they shouted together. The three spells merged into a massive crimson surge. Akia's face drained as he braced his shield and was driven back. Gauci gaped. What is this? I don't remember this spell in magic. This is a unique neon technique, John said dryly. They're basically stacking 3 Expelliarmus spells. The power multiplies. Akia, get out of here, John said, drawing his wand and stepping forward. He flicked it, and a silver, armored phantom, solid as if it were tangible, materialized and deflected the red beam up into the sky. The Auror's combined assault was stopped. Big Bear's expression changed. Goda! He barked. Goda leapt forward and fired at John, while Guchuan tried to press Big Bear's attack. As Goda's spell began to form, John half raised his wand and then pressed it down. The object summoning spell activated. Goda was the first to be affected. His body seemed seized by an enormous hand and he crumpled, the incoming spell harmlessly passing by. With another flick, John sent Goda flying, which knocked the other 2 aside. In seconds, the trio lost their ability to fight. With John's current strength, handling 3 Aurors was no problem. Let's go, John said casually. As a local, you still led us into a dead end. Makes me doubt your professionalism. Gauci muttered resentfully. Boss, how can I trouble you to do it yourself? Money doesn't come out of thin air, John replied. If you're short, why not buy some Silver Hand financial products? I just like the feeling of being surrounded by money, Gauci chuckled awkwardly, unwilling to trust others with his funds. Akiya Musashi glanced back at the 3 Aurors, worry in his eyes, but he fell into step with John. Wait, the fight isn't over, you bastards! Big Bear roared. John looked back as the dazed Aurors shakily got to their feet. Big Bear wiped blood from his lip and bellowed, How can I let you leave like this? Do all you locals talk by roaring? Gauci whispered, bewildered. Goda and Guchuan struggled up as well. Goda began, Don't underestimate. Guchuan finished, Our bonds! Big Bear curled his lip, gripping his wand. Let our bonds defeat you. They roared in unison and unleashed the spell. The 3 beams were thicker and more potent than before. 3 bottle-thick bolts streaked toward John, but the silver armor held. John narrowed his eyes, flicked his wand, and each Auror was struck as if by a giant hammer, crashing down in unison and rendered immobile. John didn't turn around. He watched them fall. After a while, the 3 dragged themselves to their feet, panting. Our bonds are firmer than diamonds. Big Bear wheezed, his face flushed and blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Chapter 457. Yet he still roared, Our bonds carry a heavy justice. When he finished, John waved his wand again. Gravity slammed down on the 3 intruders so hard the ground cracked beneath them. Gauci stared in disbelief. What were these people made of? Indestructible cockroaches. Musashi muttered to John, Let's go. Wait. John kept his gaze fixed on the trio, as if expecting them to rise once more. Musashi silently prayed they would stay down. They did not. Hey, Guchuan, Goda, you all right? One of them called. This great Goda will never stay down, another sneered. I'll never give up until Miss Yuan roasts me sweet potatoes herself, the third insisted. Under Gauci's astonished stare, the 3 hauled themselves up. They'd been smashed badly enough to warrant months in St. Mungo's, but they got back to their feet, stubborn as if nothing had happened. Gauci wondered if they were some kind of mutant. John, however, watched with growing interest. His pupils narrowed to vertical slits as a strange energy began to coil around the 3. Is this the power of bonds? He mused. He chuckled. Looks like I picked the right place. The magic of bonds is fascinating. Every time one of them spoke about their friendship, loyalty, or determination, a fresh surge of power flowed into them. The mechanism sounded odd, but there was precedent. Go back to the old savior story of Harry Potter. Harry's protection sprang from the same principle, idealism and love given force by magic. Lily's maternal love, friendship, sacrifice, emotional ties bridged the gap even with a force like Voldemort. In a world where idealism can be an active magical force, there is almost no limit. In other cultural traditions, those same hot-blooded anime, this emotional power shows up all the time. Heroes who train for a short time defeat foes who have trained for centuries, because love and bonds let them surpass limits. John watched as the bond energy pumped strength into the 3. Bones he was certain he'd broken with an object summoning spell earlier seemed to be rearranged. They moved like men given adrenaline. Curious, John decided to push the experiment further. He let the dragon's might sweep over them like a steamroller, an enormous black dragon materializing above them, breathing a world-destroying flame. Fear flooded the three hearts, and their conviction cracked. The idealistic power that had been propping them up shattered. Without that support, they collapsed like deflated balloons, their bodies limp and barely able to move. "Are they dead?" Musashi asked, rushing forward. These men were acquaintances, probably fellow students at the Magic Institute. He knelt, checked pulses, and when he confirmed they were alive, he stood and faced John. "Mr. Silverhand, thank you for your restraint. Let's go. We still need to get to the Magic Institute," John said non-committal and started walking. He stopped after 2 steps. "Erase their memories," he added. Musashi tightened his grip on his wand. Gauci, ever mercenary, offered, "I can do it for 5 galleons." "No need," Musashi said flatly. "My mistake, I'll fix it." He flicked his wand. "Obliviate." A beam of silver light washed the three. Their memories of the alley and of what had just happened vanished. Musashi left. A day and a night later, they awoke groggy, aching as if hit by a carriage, unsure how they had ended up in that alley. Chapter 481, The Magic Institute on the Volcano south of Tokyo. The Magic Institute sat on South Iwo Jima, one of the volcanic islands. Like all magical schools, it was protected by anti-apparition wards, and here, for historical reasons, the protections were especially strict. The country had once closed itself off to foreigners, and even after the lockdown ended, the tradition of suspicion persisted. Local wizards remained hostile to outsiders. Magical society in miniature reflected Muggle society. You couldn't simply fly in. There was an airbase nearby, and ships couldn't approach the island. "How do we get there?" Gauci asked. Musashi looked up at the sky. "Young students travel to the Institute on giant seagulls. We can follow them." The Institute's system differed from Hogwarts. Children were admitted at 7 and boarded officially at 11. Under 11s traveled by riding giant seagulls to a place called Kisaragi Station, a spot rarely seen by Muggles and notorious in their stories as a place where people are spirited away. The station was actually the wizarding departure point for the Institute. As they waited, wisps of mist drifted in, and the sound of beating wings grew louder. The mist thickened, and a hulking silhouette emerged. John turned to Gauci. "You stay here." Gauci opened his mouth to protest, but John tossed him a small money pouch. Gauci caught it and, appeased, agreed to stay put. Musashi glared at him and said, "For the record, that's for me from the boss, not part of any deal." "Good thinking," John murmured. "Hide. Aurors come here sometimes, and you're not supposed to be." Gauci looked around. There was nothing in the clearing but the station, nowhere to hide. The children's voices grew closer. John tapped his head with his wand and cast a disillusionment charm. Musashi did the same. They melted into the mist and the sea-borne breath of the giant seagulls. The seagulls, not dragons, but enormous enough, exhaled a white vapor that helped obscure their approach. At takeoff, Musashi slipped onto the back of one as the birds rose. John followed. The ride wasn't as comfortable as a train, John observed idly, but Musashi smiled with nostalgia. "I used to ride these to school," he said. They crossed the ocean, passing an Air Force training base where planes were parked and Muggle patrols moved below. Ahead, South Iwo Jima rose, and on its summit sat the Institute, a white palace built over a volcano. From a distance, it looked like a magnificent pagoda carved from creamy jade, an Eastern sensibility very different from Western castle architecture. The seagulls descended onto a platform among other giant birds, and the two disembarked under the mist. Inside the Institute, younger students wore pink robes. Older students' robes shifted color with their years, and a few older ones were trimmed with gold. The palace's mutton-fat jade shimmered as evening fell and the crowds thinned. John stepped inside. Musashi lingered a moment, staring at his alma mater with a mix of affection and something like regret before following. Walking beside John, Musashi asked, curious, "Why did you come to the Institute, Mr. Silverhand?" "For research," John replied. "You always need to take what others know. Eastern traditions have deep heritage. Their magic isn't necessarily stronger, but it is older in places." They paused at the main gate. The institute's name was carved on a plaque like an ancient signboard. John studied it briefly and then crossed the threshold. The instant he did, his disillusionment charm shattered. This place was defended against intruders, and its anti-intrusion wards dispelled his concealment. Professors inside the institute saw him the moment his charm failed. Chapter 458. John had expected recognition, so he was wearing a mask. The mentors from the Magic Institute arrived shortly after. Here they were called mentors rather than professors. As they appeared, a female mentor with long, straight black hair stared at the man walking beside John, and her face changed. Musashi? She looked at him in disbelief, some hidden emotion flashing behind her eyes. Musashi met her gaze, his own expression intricate, then he let out a relieved smile. You've become a mentor, Shizuka. Shizuka opened her mouth as if to speak, but an old man interrupted. He was bald, except for a long white beard that reached his stomach, tied with a purple silk ribbon. He coughed and addressed the newcomer. Akiya Musashi? Musashi's face tightened for a moment at the old man's voice, and he bowed his head respectfully. Principal Chong. The old man looked as ancient as any legend, more Dumbledore than most, but far frailer. John studied him, noting a deep scar on his forehead and the cloudy look in his eyes. There were 6 mentors in total. John cleared his throat at that moment. I'm here for an exchange of magic, he said, sweeping his gaze over them with a casual laugh. Forgive my unannounced arrival. Who are you? One of the mentors, a sinister-looking man with a hard accent, fixed John with a cold stare. You can tell us. You can call me Silver Hand. John's voice was indifferent. I can pay a fee. Principal Chong raised a hand to quiet the questioning mentor, then looked at John with more interest than suspicion. Johnny Silverhand, he said slowly. I have heard the name. John smiled. I thought your country's magical world had been closed for many years. I didn't expect my name to have reached you. Not entirely closed, Principal Chong chuckled. Your deeds are known across Europe. Even with limited information, word travels. Our empire values strength. Your philosophy fits well with ours. He studied John for a moment. Mr. Silverhand, your coming to the Magic Institute at this hour seems more than a casual visit. The study of magic blurs day and night, John replied calmly. My stance hasn't changed. I'm prepared to pay for access. I wish to examine some documents and books. Principal Chong weighed him carefully, assessing both meaning and threat. The institute was in session now. Beyond the students, there were 6 mentors present. Johnny Silverhand's reputation in parts of the European magical world was whispered alongside names like Grindelwald and Voldemort. Making an enemy of someone like him would be unwise. And alliances with foreign powers mattered, especially the favor of the Second King. After a small, deliberate pause, Principal Chong smiled and gestured for the other mentors to withdraw. His gaze swept over Musashi before he led John inside. As they entered the central courtyard, Principal Chong spoke in a voice that carried across the stone. Musashi, you are a sinner. You are not worthy to enter this sacred place. Musashi stopped immediately. I understand, Principal Chong, he replied quietly. Chong nodded once and continued leading John through the courtyard. Musashi remained behind, bewildered, watching them go. The path through the institute was not short, and John kept the conversation light as they walked. Your relationship with the mundane world seems different from ours in the West, he remarked. You used to be called Onmyoji, serving the sovereign, weren't you? Principal Chong stroked his beard with obvious pride. Yes, our imperial line is ancient, 10,000 generations, some say, a divine family. Their bloodline is unique and noble. John observed the old man's reverence. Long ago, the wizards here and the monarch had stood in a clear, superior, subordinate relationship. Traces of that loyalty still lingered. The Ministry of Magic here maintained ties, though those ties had eroded in modern times as weaponry and politics changed the balance. Principal Chong still clung to the old order. To be honest, Principal Chong said as they entered an inner courtyard, your arrival honors us. The courtyard centered on a magnificent cherry blossom tree, its pink and white petals luminous under the moon. The thick trunk and the cascade of blossoms gave the place an almost sacred silence. Principal Chong knocked on a wooden door with his wand. The doors swung open to reveal an attic crowded with bookshelves and scrolls, the Institute's library. John picked up a scroll and unrolled it. Ancient Onmyoji writings described complex sealing rituals. You know a great deal, Principal Chong, John observed. We enjoy study, Chong replied, smiling. A colleague of mine has praised your wisdom so often that I have long looked forward to meeting you. On the ground floor of the attic, a door stood tightly sealed, rimmed with numerous protective runes. John glanced at it. What's behind that door? Nothing of note, Principal Chong answered, a hint of reluctance in his voice. He didn't press further. Instead, he offered, I will close the library for you for a time, so my students won't disturb you. John accepted. The doors were closed, and the runes sealed against interruption. From the second floor, John could gaze out over the courtyard and the cherry tree. The library's collection wasn't necessarily larger than the great Western libraries he'd seen, but many of the texts were ancient and rare. John settled in and began to read. The Institute's ancestor was the Onmyo-ryo. The magic here had evolved from Onmyoji practices and differed in important ways from Western traditions. For instance, paper spells, talismans inscribed to produce effects, were called fu in their system. They functioned similarly to John's own talismans, but were used more often for sealing. Sealing arts were common, employed historically to bind entities lingering between life and death, the stuff of the night parade of 100 demons. How like ghosts, John muttered, flipping to another scroll. He read from night into dawn, as if his brain were a parched sponge, greedily absorbing new structures and ideas. By the second night, his expression had grown serious. One set of scrolls confirmed a theory John had suspected. Magic here, too, was closely tied to mental states. Emotions could be used to surge magical energy. He thought of training Malfoy, how he had coaxed power by stoking anger. The texts were written in the neon language, but John's facility with tongues made acquisition fast. One book made him uneasy. It documented experiments meant to improve magical talent, shock therapies to stimulate the brain, electric jolts intended to provoke intense emotional reactions and thereby increase power. There were other, crueler methods recorded as well, pushing children from great heights to trigger latent abilities, trials that bordered on torture. Wizards were resilient, the notes argued, and the ends justified brutal means. John shut the book and tossed it to the side. Such external stimulation would at best create unstable, dangerous wizards. At worst, it would make monsters. He pictured the prison bars of Azkaban for those who would sanction such things. On the third day, he found another subject, bond magic. It resembled the mother's love trope, ancient rituals where emotional bonds, friendship rather than blood, granted tangible enhancements. The descriptions read like something out of a storybook, but the practical structure of the rituals intrigued him. It was the kind of idea that inspired heroes when they shouted about the power of bonds. John wasn't an anime protagonist, but he could see useful principles here. He lost himself in the attic for days, 4 at least, delving into ancient seals, fu talismans, emotional conduits, and the dark experiments the Institute recorded. Outside the sealed library, he had no sense of what was happening. He didn't know that Musashi had been taken away and imprisoned. Chapter 459, Dungeon. Instructor Jingxiang stood outside the cell and looked at Musashi, who had grown much thinner in 4 days. Her voice trembled with sorrow. "Why did you come back, Musashi-kun?" Musashi stared at her with hollow eyes and answered hoarsely. "I went out, and I tried to run, but I couldn't escape." "This isn't your fate," Jingxiang choked. "You weren't meant to be like this. The moment I walked into that room, the end was already written." Musashi glanced down at his hands, roughened and scarred, and managed a bitter smile. "Da Xiong and the others want to kill me because I cheated and ran. When I left that place, everything that happened behind those doors kept replaying every night." He clutched his head as if in pain. His voice came out like the rasp of a dying animal. "Do you know what it's like to see those people, people as helpless as I was, who were experimented on, who were electrocuted?" He surged toward the cell door and shouted like a madman, "Why did you come back, Jingxiang? You should stay away from this hell." Confusion and fury lit his eyes. Jingxiang took a step back, paling, her lips trembling. I wanted to protect them." "You can't protect them," Musashi said bitterly. "These secrets have been here for decades. As long as Principal Chong is in control, there is no way." Jingxiang refused to back down. But if I left, then there would be no hope at all. Musashi slumped down, defeated. Were you angry I couldn't save your younger brother? No, please don't think that, Musashi-kun. Jingxiang hurried to explain. I know you've been out there. You've sent us money. Sometimes small amounts, sometimes large. Every coin you sent was bought with your life, she said gently. I know you want to protect the children, but this isn't the way. The only way to save them is to sever it completely. Musashi stared at the woman who had once been closest to him. For years he had been scrabbling for money, as if to atone. In the face of Jingxiang's resolve, his avoidance felt cowardly. You won't succeed, he murmured. It's not just Principal Chong. Other powerful people are involved. Jingxiang said nothing, but there was a fierce light in her eyes. Half a month passed. John compressed his days until they were nearly continuous study. He slept 2 hours a night, no more. He forced himself on until he had a preliminary grasp of bond magic and felt ready to leave. As he opened the library door, Principal Chong was already standing there. Don't you have classes? John asked, surprised. The old man seemed to have forgotten he was the principal. He grinned. Mr. Silverhand may not realize today is the students' holiday. They've all left for home. I see, John said. I'll take my leave then. Wait, Principal Chong's cloudy eyes flashed oddly. Aren't you curious about what's behind that door? John paused. Behind it? Yes, it's a research project the school has been running for years. Principal Chong's invitation was smooth. A joint project with the Ministry of Magic. I wondered if you, Mr. Silverhand, might be willing to give us your guidance. He spoke of John with exaggerated reverence, the second king who might help them. John smiled faintly. Your friend seems to think highly of me. Because you are one of the few who can help. Principal Chong pushed the sealed door open with effort. It groaned and revealed a staircase that plunged into darkness. The principal's smile looked strange in the dimness. John narrowed his eyes, wary of whatever trick lay ahead, and followed him down. Chapter 483, The Research of Magic. It was a deep, dark corridor. The place left no impression on John at first, but he watched Principal Chong closely. This man was neither a hunter nor touched by night demon blessings, so why was he leading them without lights? Principal Chong kept talking as they descended. Mr. Silverhand, what do you think is the essence of magic? Energy and emotion, John answered calmly. Chong stopped in his tracks. For a moment, John saw surprise cross his face. Yes, emotion, he breathed. He seemed almost elated, like a parched man finding rain. As wizards, our emotional states are the key. Emotion lets us shape magic with will. He warmed to his subject like an old lecturer. Young wizards, because of their volatile emotions, struggle to control their power. Their emotional storms produce unexpectedly strong effects. John frowned. The principal plucked at a familiar trope, young magic being somehow purer and stronger. He thought of examples. A child could unleash sudden brilliance, but that brilliance was raw and unfocused. With training and experience, a wizard learns restraint and precision. John's mind supplied the rebuttal, even as he listened. Youth, he thought, can produce spectacular outbursts, but steady, controlled mastery in adulthood often yields far greater power. They rounded a corner, and a faint glow appeared ahead. The corridor opened into a vast hollow chamber. Above, dense roots hung down, each connected to a transparent glass tube. Principal Chong's voice echoed in the space. I believe some muggles have latent potential to become wizards, he said. Their structure is similar. If we can stimulate their emotions beyond the limit, they might cross over. Below them, men in protective suits worked. One opened a glass tank connected to the roots. Inside lay a soaking child, dozens of electrodes fixed to his skull and body. A sunken pit at the chamber's center bristled with viscous liquid. At the bottom of the pit lay countless corpses. On some of the bones, familiar markings had been carved. Mr. Silverhand, I sincerely invite you to join my experiment, Principal Chong said with a fanatic gleam. If we master this method, we can create an army. We won't have to worry about wizard casualties. So long as there are enough muggles, we can keep transforming them. John had to swallow. The child brought out below screamed in terror. The techs in suits activated the switch without a trace of mercy. Electricity surged through the child. His cries tore the air. Black smoke flickered around his body. Someone turned off the current, too late. The child's body went limp, fluids leaking. The techs logged the data with clinical detachment. Send him to the Night Watch department, one said. See if he can join the 100 ghosts. They picked up the child's body and carried him off. John felt bile rise in his throat. This, he realized, was the experiment. Inflict extreme pain to provoke magical talent until the muggle crosses over. The viscous liquid was a potion, something that could sustain a body submerged in it. The corpses at the bottom were the price they paid. Beneath the chamber's grotesque beauty, a cherry blossom tree planted in the cavern, piled bones formed a macabre mulch. Pink petals dusted powder white bone. John swallowed hard. I always thought a school ought to educate, he muttered, forcing calm. Even Durmstrang, which teaches dark arts, wouldn't abduct muggles for experiments. Principal Chong laughed softly. Muggles are the cheapest commodity, he said. Their reproductive capacity is astonishing. Like sows, they keep producing. Their death rate is negligible compared to their birth rate. He spoke like a man explaining logistics, obsessive and clinical. I discovered this in another country. I went there with the army and found my experimental paradise. We've had failures, of course, but those are just small setbacks. Chapter 460. Human experimentation, a war criminal, and he's proud of it here. John laughed, contempt in his voice. Principal Chong stared at him with fanatic intensity. Mr. Silverhand, join us. I've wanted to cooperate for a long time, Chong went on breathlessly, not just for your influence, but because of one other thing. Your extraordinary strength, even though you're a muggle-born. He scratched at the scar on his head like a man possessed, tearing his skin until blood ran, and he didn't stop. You are the most special. No muggle-born wizard has ever shown your talent. You would make the perfect research subject. His greedy gaze roved over John. John replied coolly, So that's it. No wonder you let me live in the library for half a month. You were preparing something. From the moment they'd met, Principal Chong had been unusually eager. He'd allowed outsiders to see the school's ancient books. He'd sealed the library for me to stay. It had all been calculated. He'd invited John. If John refused, he'd force him. I'm curious how you knew I was muggle-born, John said. Perhaps you can tell me who your friend is. Chong's grin turned sinister. Of course, Mr. Silverhand isn't unknown to me. His friend is. Lord Voldemort, Chong spat, and suddenly it all snapped into place for John. Only someone tied to that name could have known his bloodline. Chong continued, feverish with triumph. 30 years ago, a wizard crossed the sea and came here. He was as exceptional as you. I heard he died abroad, but then last year he appeared before me again. That's how I knew there was yet another extraordinarily talented wizard, John Wick. He stopped pretending to be a concerned educator and smiled like a surgeon who'd found the perfect specimen. Your body isn't as fragile as ordinary muggles. Your blood must be extraordinary. He prodded at John with greedy curiosity. Beneath the legendary Second King's mask sits a child not even 17. You have so much potential. Let me awaken it, Mr. Silverhand. Around them, other wizards materialized. John recognized some of them as aurors. The man in front of him was no teacher. John drew his wand. Chong only laughed. Mr. Silverhand, you should notice the difference here. John's eyes traced the walls. Dense runes plastered every surface, runic seals, a sealing charm woven into a magical domain designed to suppress the magic of anyone inside. After half a month studying them, John knew their function. Even the fearsome Second King, stripped of magic, would be a lamb to the slaughter. A tall man stepped forward and handed Chong a knife. Chong accepted it like a sacrament. The blade flashed hungrily. Compared to magic, I still prefer the clash of steel, he said, dragging a fingertip along the edge. This blade, Guangdao Heping, was a treasure given to me by the Emperor when I served in the army. He stared at John's silver mask and grinned with broken teeth. Don't worry, Mr. Silverhand, I'll make you perfect. Losing a few limbs from that perfect body won't matter. The intention was clear. Don't even think about escaping, Chong said. Only I can open that door. Dozens of people were already closing in, forming a ring. Can't use magic? John asked mildly. Is that supposed to be an advantage for you? There were more than 100 people in the room. If 30 wizards used spells on him at once, John wouldn't claim victory. But 30 men in close combat, different story. He didn't tuck away his wand. Instead, he flipped his grip for an inverted hold. He smiled with a wicked edge. Before we begin, anyone else want to leave? Dungeon. For half a month, Musashi had been locked away. Pale, hair greasy, beard unkempt, he looked exhausted, but he hadn't been idle. On his 70-something attempt at wandless casting, the lock responded. With a bang, the door flew open. For the first time in weeks, a hint of joy crossed his face. Had his wandless casting finally worked? Musashi-kun, I'm taking you out. Shizuka pushed the door wider. She'd been waiting for this moment. Now, when the institute was practically empty because of the holiday, when Principal Chong was escorting Johnny Silverhand to the library, it was the best chance for escape. Shizuka, Musashi said, I need a wand. His had been taken when he was captured. She'd anticipated it and handed him a cherry wood wand, then grabbed his hand, ready to go. Expelliarmus! A red light struck Shizuka's wand, knocking it aside. Musashi's voice was calm and steady, but serious. Sorry, Shizuka, I can't leave. I've decided to destroy this place. Shizuka's face went white. You're crazy. You can't take down the institute by yourself, and the person you're here for won't get out either. You don't understand, Mr. Silverhand, Musashi said quietly. His power is beyond what you can imagine. You should go. Leave before I destroy this place. She was about to argue when a red light flared in the cell. Musashi reacted, stepping between Shizuka and whatever had fired. There wasn't time for a shield charm. The red beam hit him. He convulsed, his face blanching. Crucio, Shizuka, you'd actually help that damn disgrace. Akiya Musashi? A voice hissed as a figure materialized in the dungeon. Pale, effeminate, snake-like, it was Crow, one of the instructors who had been present when John was brought before them. Shizuka's face drained. She lunged for her wand, but a silver flash struck the floor by her feet and made a crater. She dared not move rashly. Crow took his time, savoring the torment. A malicious smile curled his lips. I've hated you for a long time. You always opposed me in school, he purred. Now you've fallen into my hands, Akiya Musashi. You will beg for death. Crucio ripped through Musashi again. He screamed, but Crow didn't relent. Crow, stop! He'll die if you keep this up! Shizuka cried. Shut up! Crow snapped and flicked his wand. A rope slung Shizuka against the wall, binding her. Principal Chong won't let him go. As a former Golden Robe student, your pride and dignity will be ground under my heel. Crow put the sole of his shoe on Musashi's fingers and crushed them. The pain was a white-hot bell in Musashi's head, and his screams filled the dungeon. Crow's narrow eyes reflected nothing but cruelty. When he seemed satisfied, he raised his wand and pronounced the final spell. Your time is up, Akiya Musashi. Musashi couldn't speak. He bit back a scream and clung to consciousness as Crow sent a green light at him. Then, unexpectedly, Crow dropped to the floor, lifeless. Tsk, tsk, tsk. I just saved your life. Gaussi's unabashed face appeared in Musashi's view. The 50-50 split is even now. Gaussi? Musashi managed as he struggled up. How did you get here? A stupid way. Flying broomstick, Gaussi said, pulling Musashi upright and complaining about the suddenness of the call. It was too sudden to warn me. Musashi stared. He hadn't sent a message. It wasn't me, he said. It was the boss, Gaussi said with a greedy smile. Finishing this job is worth as much as the Selwyn one. Johnny Silverhand had sent Gaussi? Musashi was full of questions, but there wasn't time. Mr. Silverhand was taken to the room in the library. He might be in danger. What? How dare they touch my boss? Gaussi exploded. Johnny Silverhand was his cash cow and his life. He stormed out at once. Musashi snatched up his wand, freed Shizuka, and followed. Shizuka looked at Crow's corpse, terror draining the color from her face. She knew things had gone too far. She followed them. Thanks to Principal Chong's routine, sending students home during the holiday, the Magic Institute was unusually empty. Outside the library, just 4 other instructors were resting in their offices. When they reached the rune-covered door, Gaussi tried to force it. It's useless, Shizuka warned. The seal is very powerful. She pulled a sharp stone, cut her palm, and pressed it over the runes, letting blood drip into the sigils. As her blood soaked the runes, the locks loosened. Musashi watched her, conflicted expression in his eyes. When Principal Chong made the seal, he didn't expect his great-granddaughter to disobey him, he said. Chong Yuan, Principal Chong, was Shizuka's great-grandfather. The revelation twisted something in her. Her face went pale. I'm just Shizuka, she said softly. She didn't want to be linked to that inhuman patriarch. Gaussy pushed the door open.